In today's episode, we will revisit the worst deaths we covered on the channel in 2025. Stories so tragic and shocking, they forced us to confront the delicate line between life and loss. It was September 9th, 2017, in Santa Fe, New Mexico. The historic plaza was alive with music and dancing as the annual fiesta reached its evening peak. Lanterns flickered against the adobe walls, and the air carried a blend of roasted chile and beer. Crowds pressed around the stage, unaware that the night's energy would be broken by a miscalculation that ended in disaster. Antonio Delgado was 51, a lifelong resident of Santa Fe, known for his woodworking and deep ties to local cultural events. He had earned modest recognition at community fairs for carving furniture in traditional Spanish colonial style. He was known to be proud, stubborn, and prone to drinking heavily at public gatherings. Antonio saw the fiesta not only as heritage, but as a stage to prove himself. Risk did not deter him. If anything, it amplified his sense of bravado. In earlier years, he volunteered for demonstrations, carving, knotting, storytelling, but lately pushed for more daring displays. The rope walk was one of these, drawn from folklore rather than history. Without sponsors or proper gear, he improvised. 2 poles braced in sand-filled barrels and a hemp rope strung between them, with only the brick plaza below. That evening, after hours of drinking, Antonio declared he would perform the rope walk in front of the stage. Onlookers attempted to dissuade him, pointing out the instability of the setup and his unsteady condition. Festival staff were occupied with scheduled performers and allowed him space, assuming it would amount to little more than showmanship. Antonio, bottle still in hand, climbed onto the makeshift platform. The rope sagged under his weight, visibly uneven, but he treated the instability as part of the display. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as he steadied himself, muttering that he could handle it. A few clapped hesitantly, though the majority watched in tense silence. Each step sent the rope bouncing, his shoes slipping slightly against the fibers. Witnesses described him shifting his arms in wide arcs, more to keep balance than to perform. From below, the sway of his body was erratic, his coordination evidently dulled by alcohol. About a third of the way across, his foot slipped sharply. He lurched sideways, the bottle slipping from his grip as his free arm scraped along the rope. The crowd gasped as he toppled into open air, his body twisting toward the edge of the plaza. The fall ended in seconds. He landed hard among the spectators, his wrist slamming against a stone bench with a crack audible even through the music. His head struck the plaza bricks immediately after, producing a hollow, unmistakable sound. Witnesses close to the impact described blood pooling almost instantly, spreading across the uneven stones. Shouts of panic cut through the festival music as people backed away. Volunteers forced through the crowd and laid him flat, a few trying compressions while others stood back. Paramedics arrived within minutes from a nearby staging area, but Antonio never regained consciousness. Despite their efforts, the combined head and chest trauma was irreversible, and he was pronounced dead within the hour at a local hospital. The fiesta was halted for about 20 minutes, as organizers cleared the plaza and calmed the crowd. Music eventually returned, though in a restrained, uneasy rhythm that never recaptured the earlier energy. Vendors reported slower business than usual, with many families leaving earlier than planned. By the following day, the atmosphere of the celebration was described as muted, with conversations repeatedly circling back to the spectacle that had overshadowed the night. It was April 12th, 2015, when Ellis Graham's quest for a new beginning would end in tragedy at a crane-based bungee jumping site in Nevada. Ellis, a 42-year-old financial analyst, had spent most of his adult life buried in spreadsheets and risk assessments for a major investment firm. Known for his methodical nature and conservative approach to both business and personal decisions, he was the last person anyone expected at an extreme sports venue, but his recent divorce had shaken him profoundly, forcing him to reevaluate his carefully structured existence and question everything he thought he knew about himself. His 15-year-old son, Michael, had suggested the bungee jump during one of their increasingly awkward weekend visits following the custody arrangement. The teenager, desperate to connect with his suddenly distant father, thought an adrenaline rush might help Ellis break free from his emotional numbness and rediscover some spark of life. What Michael didn't know was that his father had been hiding a recently diagnosed heart arrhythmia from both his family and his medical records. The urban jumping site featured a massive industrial crane positioned strategically over an abandoned limestone quarry that had been converted for recreational use. Ellis arrived that morning with Michael, both nervous but determined to create a positive memory together after months of strained interactions. The facility appeared professional and well-maintained, with proper safety equipment and trained staff members who seemed experienced and competent. Ellis deliberately omitted his cardiac condition from the comprehensive medical screening form, convincing himself that his prescribed medication had the problem under control and that disclosure would only complicate matters unnecessarily. Staff fitted him with a full-body harness, plus secondary ankle cuffs, following standard protocol for all jumpers. The facility used a hybrid redundancy system, combining both harness types to exceed state safety standards. An automated external defibrillator was present on the platform as required by state regulations. The crane lifted Ellis 200 feet above the quarry as his heart rate climbed steadily from anticipation and mounting anxiety. Unknown to everyone present, the combination of adrenaline and extreme physical stress was creating dangerous irregularities in his cardiac rhythm that his medication could no longer suppress. He executed a clean step-off, falling smoothly through the crisp morning air with perfect form. The bungee cord performed exactly as designed, stretching to its calculated maximum extension before beginning the upward rebound phase. Ellis completed the initial rebound successfully, but within seconds of reaching the apex, his body went abruptly limp mid-swing as his cardiac system failed catastrophically. His body suddenly went limp, all purposeful movement ceasing as he hung motionless from the functioning equipment. The trained supervisor immediately recognized the medical emergency and activated retrieval procedures. Staff began lowering Ellis back to the platform while calling for emergency assistance. The rhythm was consistent with ventricular fibrillation, a sudden arrhythmia occasionally triggered by intense stress. Staff rotated through CPR compressions while administering oxygen. Michael watched in horror as paramedics arrived and continued advanced life support measures. Despite over 20 minutes of aggressive resuscitation efforts, Ellis could not be revived. He was pronounced dead at the scene, having suffered a massive cardiac arrest triggered by the extreme physiological stress, combined with his underlying arrhythmia. The investigation revealed that all equipment had functioned properly, and staff had followed correct procedures. The tragedy stemmed entirely from Ellis's failure to disclose his cardiac condition during medical screening. His deception, born from a desperate desire to connect with his son, had cost him his life. The facility temporarily suspended operations while implementing enhanced medical clearance requirements. The crane jumping operation eventually reopened under stricter protocols, but the site would forever be marked by the memory of a father who died trying to bridge the gap with his teenage son. It was September 10th, 2015, in the Lauterbrunnen Valley, Switzerland. Clouds sat high over steep walls that dropped more than 2,000 feet to the meadows and a narrow road below. Daniel Price was 31 years old and worked as a software tester. He was taking time off from work. All summer, he had been flying clean lines in the mountains and keeping notes on wind, cloud base, and landmarks. He preferred steady plans over last-second choices and skipped exits that looked busy or gusty. He wanted one clean valley run before flying home. Two friends hiked with him to the jumping spot just after sunrise. The air felt cool, and the wind at ground level moved the grass lightly. From the spot, they could see a big piece of rock that stuck out, then a line of trees on a slope. The plan was simple: fly left of the rock, go over the trees, and clear the road with plenty of room. They laid out the wingsuit and checked zippers, booties, and grippers. A small helmet-mounted camera recorded the exit and flight, and a small GPS logger sat under the suit. One friend stayed at the exit with a camera on his head. The other drove down and set a tripod at a pullout along the road to film from below. Cell coverage worked at the valley floor, so they kept a phone open for basic updates. Wind looked light. Leaves moved, but there were no strong gusts or swirling air in the nearby trees. The clouds stayed high and steady. Price practiced the path with his hands. A smooth push, quick speed up, then a slight left to miss the big rock, and a gentle right to go over the trees. He clipped his visual altimeter to his wrist, set an audible in his helmet, and stepped to a known exit notch used by locals. Price pushed off cleanly and reached flight in seconds. From the camera at the ledge, his suit gained speed, and the valley opened under his path. He angled left toward the shoulder of rock. The line looked accurate and tight. As he crossed the big rock, the suit flew close to the wall. A small fix came late, and the path stayed near the stone longer than planned. From the field below, a farmer looked up at the sound of wind moving over fabric. The roadside camera showed a brief hit with rock, a change in direction, and then a crash out of view. His friend at the ledge called the friend at the road, who called emergency services. A rescue helicopter was requested. Mountain Rescue reached the slope first and coordinated with the helicopter crew. The site lay below the trees and above the road on a steep mix of dirt and loose rock. Teams set a safety perimeter and asked drivers to keep moving so the road wouldn't back up with onlookers. Police took statements from the two friends, the farmer, and two drivers who had pulled into the same roadside turnout as the tripod. The friend at the road handed over the tripod footage and the timestamps. The friend at the exit provided the helmet video and a copy of the GPS file. Weather notes from that morning were written in a pocket notebook and matched the light wind that locals reported. By early afternoon, rescue teams finished the recovery and moved equipment back to the road. The helicopter was sent away. Police marked the jumping spot, the flight path along the wall, and the area above the trees where the path changed. They measured distances so the pictures could be matched to the records later. The next week, Price's parents held a small cremation in their hometown. Co-workers joined by video and sent a simple wreath. His friends shared the last GPS track and said he had kept to the plan until the left-hand section near the buttress. Cantonal Police and Mountain Rescue documented the GPS, the weather notes, and both videos. Authorities reminded visitors that small errors at high speed leave no margin in tight terrain and asked wingsuit flyers to choose conservative lines when winds are not steady. The coroner listed blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Among flyers who used the valley, the run became a quiet example used in safety talks. Keep more room near rock, keep decisions simple, and if a line asks for perfect timing, treat it as a warning, not a goal. It was June 20th, 2015, at a county fairgrounds in Ohio. A vintage two-seat biplane sat near the show line, while a wing-walking setup with simple handholds and a tethered harness was checked one more time. Claire Mason was 37 years old and worked as a stunt performer. She had trained for years on older biplanes. She practiced low, straight passes and simple moves and kept her actions tight and repeatable. She cared about timing, handholds, and clear safety calls with the pilot. The pilot that day had the proper ratings and was known among show crews for smooth, steady controls. Mid-afternoon heat pushed temperatures near 90 degrees Fahrenheit, which means the hot, thin air makes wings and engines work less well. A large crowd lined the fence. On Claire's signal, the pilot brought the biplane down the runway for a flat pass to check power and control, then set up for the move that showed her moving from the center section toward the right wing. Before the move, the crew checked radio connections, safety rope clips, and hand signals. A light breeze moved across the field at about 6 to 8 miles per hour. The pilot began a climb to give room, then started a shallow turn so the crowd could see Claire's movement from the side. The airplane's nose came up as the speed dropped for the act. Claire stepped from the center post to the right wing area she had practiced many times. The pilot held a very slight bank and added power, but the hot air meant there was less lift than on cooler days. From the fence line, the airplane looked slow and nose high, with the upper wing blocking part of the body from view. A person with a video camera near midfield said later the plane stalled, then dropped like a door. The biplane shook, rolled toward the field, and came down in a steep path from a few hundred feet above the ground. The right wingtip hit first, followed by the nose and lower gear. A brief spray of dirt and parts marked the impact spot, inside the safety area and well away from the crowd. Show staff waved people back and used cones to widen the clear zone while emergency crews moved in. Fire and EMS units from the fairgrounds detail reached the site within moments. Fuel and battery switches were made safe, and fire equipment stood by as medics checked both people. Deputies and air show operations staff pushed the crowd line back and suspended the show. The field was closed and a temporary command post was set up near a hangar. Deputies took statements from witnesses, including the person with the video camera and photographers. The show's safety officer provided the pilot's paperwork and aircraft registration. A weather printout showed the temperature and pressure readings that explained the higher density altitude. By late afternoon, the coroner documented the scene and arranged transport. The wreckage was marked and guarded overnight. The next morning, investigators took custody for detailed examination, beginning with the engine, propeller, and controls. In the days that followed, they gathered engine data, maintenance logs, pilot records, and weather information. Video from several angles was also reviewed, with the focus on airspeed management and climb performance in the afternoon heat. The coroner listed blunt force trauma as the cause of death for both people. A joint memorial honored both Claire and the pilot at the airfield the following weekend. Flowers were placed at the edge of the runway. Aviation officials paused low-altitude stunt waivers at the venue and reminded airshow organizers to factor density altitude into show routines on hot days. It was June 28, 2014, in Bristol, England. In one garden, a few neighbors laughed as they arranged decorations under a sagging gazebo. Nothing looked dangerous, just bunting, balloons, and an oversized plastic archway borrowed from a wedding hire company. Helen Archer, 67, was sitting nearby on a folding chair with a cardigan over her shoulders. She had taught primary school for 3 decades and was known locally for her patience and her soft voice that still carried a trace of the classroom. Since her husband's death 2 years earlier, she'd kept herself busy tending flowers and hosting small neighborhood teas. When the volunteer group asked to use her garden for a surprise anniversary celebration, she agreed without hesitation. She liked company. Despite her arthritis and shortness of breath, she refused help setting up, insisting she could at least supervise. Her physical frailty wasn't new, but her willingness to stay involved made her feel useful again. The neighborhood group, a few retired couples and a pair of younger volunteers, planned the event for a neighbor's 40th wedding anniversary. Someone suggested adding a fun surprise moment, a confetti cannon under the archway, for when the guests of honor walked in. The borrowed arch, intended for indoor use, stood nearly 8 feet high with weighted feet that weren't properly secured on the uneven flagstones. Helen watched them assemble it, occasionally smiling but never realizing how unstable it looked from the side. The prankster, a man in his 50s, wanted the arch to appear larger, so he added 2 helium columns and plastic panels tied with thin garden wire. By late afternoon, everything was ready. Guests began filtering in, bringing trays of food and bottles of cider. Helen sat just a few feet from the arch, waving and greeting people as they entered the garden. The man with the confetti cannon positioned himself behind a bush, aiming the launcher towards the path. The idea was to fire as the couple arrived, catching the moment on video. Several people had their phones out, laughing about how surprised the guests would be. Nobody noticed that one side of the arch had started to lean forward slightly under the weight of the decorations. When the guests of honor stepped through the gate, the man fired the cannon. The compressed air burst was louder than expected. A sharp, metallic, followed by a bright plume of shredded paper and helium balloons shooting upward. Startled, a few people screamed, but laughter followed quickly. Then the left leg of the arch jerked. Witnesses later described a slow, wavering motion before the entire structure tilted forward. Helen tried to stand, but her chair caught on the paving. The arch collapsed in one motion, the aluminum frame striking her across the chest and shoulder. Chaos ensued, people shouting, chairs clattering, the camera jerking toward the ground. Several neighbors rushed to lift the frame, but the tangle of pipes and balloons made it difficult. Helen's hands moved briefly, then went still. A neighbor called 999, while another attempted to free her breathing space. When paramedics arrived, they cut away the arch and began resuscitation. She was taken to Southmead Hospital, where doctors treated multiple rib fractures, internal bleeding, and cardiac arrest. But she was pronounced dead the next day. The coroner's inquest later found that the arch had not been anchored and had been overloaded with decorations. Footage from a nearby community center's CCTV and several mobile phones confirmed that no stabilizing weights or ties were used. The confetti launcher's discharge likely triggered the collapse. In the weeks that followed, the community fractured. Some blamed the man who fired the cannon. Others blamed the loose oversight of the event. Helen's granddaughter held a quiet memorial in the same garden, planting flowers beneath the spot where the arch had stood. A brief safety bulletin was circulated by the council to remind residents that even private gatherings must comply with event safety standards. The neighborhood group that had organized the party dissolved quietly, its members too ashamed to meet again. It was October 14th, 2016, in Queens, New York. In the apartment block on 37th Avenue, most tenants were winding down for the night. Down the hall from the second-floor landing, an old man sat alone in his living room, watching sports reruns. Outside his door, two younger men whispered, holding their phones out to record. Roberto Bert Morales was 58, a retired subway maintenance worker. He'd spent 30 years under fluorescent tunnels before taking early retirement after a mild heart attack. He lived quietly, collected his pension, and spent evenings at the local bar watching games with a few old co-workers. He had a weak heart and some shortness of breath, but doctors said with medication and less stress, he could live comfortably for years. He kept his small apartment in perfect order, ashtray cleaned, remote on the table, slippers lined by the sofa. The two men who called themselves his buddies were a decade younger, part of a newer crowd that hung around the bar. They'd filmed small pranks before, fake lottery wins, surprise scares, minor nonsense meant for laughs online. Bert tolerated them, sometimes laughed along. The idea for the fake break-in came up during a late evening argument about who could handle being robbed. Someone joked that Bert would probably drop dead from shock. The comment turned into a dare. They decided to sneak into his hallway and stage a mock burglary while recording his reaction. It was cruel, but they told themselves it would just be noise, a few laughs, and then an apology. By 10:40 p.m., the two men were outside Bert's apartment, hoods up, half drunk. One carried a mask, the other had a crowbar. They whispered and giggled, testing how loud they could bang on the wall before anyone noticed. The hallway camera later showed them pacing, building up nerve. They waited until a TV ad break echoed faintly through the door, then started the act. 3 hard bangs, 1 shout, the sound of the crowbar slamming against the door frame. Inside, Bert was likely confused and frightened. He wasn't expecting visitors. His building had been robbed years earlier, and the memory had probably left him cautious. He looked through the peephole but saw only movement, dark clothing, and the flash of metal. His pulse rose sharply. When another crash hit the door, he opened it halfway, instinctively bracing himself. The 2 masked figures lunged forward, shouting. The building's camera recorded the moment clearly. Bert froze, his right hand clutching his chest. His knees buckled, and he fell backward into the hallway, knocking over a folding chair. The 2 men stopped instantly. A neighbor across the hall opened her door after hearing the crash. She found Bert on the floor, gasping shallowly. The pranksters panicked. One ran for the stairs while the other knelt beside him, trying to shake him awake. A third resident called 911. Police and EMTs arrived within 5 minutes, finding Bert unresponsive with signs of cardiac arrest. Resuscitation efforts continued for about 10 minutes before he was transported to Elmhurst Hospital Center, where he was pronounced dead. The cause: sudden cardiac arrest precipitated by acute stress in a patient with coronary artery disease. Building CCTV footage, seized by investigators, showed the entire sequence. The 2 men were identified easily. Both had prior misdemeanor records. Prosecutors charged them with second-degree reckless endangerment and criminal trespass, standard charges under New York penal law for actions causing foreseeable harm without intent to kill. The funeral took place quietly at a local church. About 24 people attended, mostly old co-workers and neighbors. His widow, who lived separately after a long estrangement, refused to speak publicly or push for harsher charges. The two pranksters each received 3 years probation, community service, and a restraining order, barring contact with the family. It was May 9, 2015, at a small temple in Kyoto. Volunteers were arriving early to set up the annual temple book fair, joking and carrying boxes of donations. Among them, a harmless prank. A thin layer of water spread across an entrance ramp as part of a reflection joke for latecomers would soon take away a life. Keiko Sato was 74, a part-time librarian known for her meticulous organization and calm demeanor. She had early-stage osteoporosis, making her cautious with stairs and slopes, and she walked with a slight forward lean to protect her spine. She had spent decades cataloging local history books and volunteering at community events, driven by a sense of responsibility rather than adventure. She enjoyed gardening and long walks, but she was conscious of her physical limitations. Despite her prudence, Keiko had a habit of taking small risks to maintain independence, such as carrying crates or reaching higher shelves, trusting her experience over caution. Keiko had no sponsors or external pressures, but she had a personal standard to be reliable. She arrived early each year to help with the book fair setup, carrying boxes of donated books and organizing tables. The temple was known for uneven ramps, small steps, and wet stone surfaces after rain, all hazards she knew well. The prankers, 2 younger volunteers from a nearby college, had a casual disregard for risk, intending the water film as a light-hearted visual trick rather than a slipping hazard. They assumed everyone would see it and avoid it, but they hadn't accounted for Keiko arriving alone with a crate. On this day, the assignment seemed simple. Transport donations up a gently sloping entrance ramp and place them near the registration table. But the prank made it unusually dangerous. Temple's CCTV later showed Keiko approaching, focused on balancing her load, unaware of the slippery film. The volunteers who had applied the water were chatting near the corner, distracted. No warning signs had been posted, and the thin layer of water blended with the natural shine of the stone. The ramp's incline was modest, but combined with her limited mobility, it created a hazard far greater than any of the pranksters anticipated. Keiko stepped onto the ramp, her hands full of books, her feet placed deliberately. Her weight shifted as she adjusted the crate, and the water film instantly reduced friction. Her right foot slid forward, while her left foot tried to compensate, creating a sudden, unsteady backward tilt. Her crate tumbled against her chest, amplifying the motion. Temple's CCTV captured the motion in clear detail. A pause, a subtle lurch, and then her body collapsing backward onto the stone surface. The impact was immediate. Keiko's head struck the concrete edge of a low step with a heavy thud. The crate scattered books across the ramp, and the film reflected the overhead sunlight, highlighting the sudden, frozen chaos. Volunteers froze in place, some rushing to dial emergency services while others applied first aid. Paramedics arrived quickly, noting multiple fractures and an acute intracranial hemorrhage. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where she succumbed 2 days later, due to complications from fragile bones and blood-thinning medication. The prankers were inconsolable, publicly apologizing and cooperating with temple authorities. The temple canceled the remainder of the book fair and refunded all donations. A memorial reading was held in Keiko's honor, and volunteers established a community safety day focusing on fall prevention for the elderly. Over the next 5 years, a volunteer rota was instituted to escort older visitors during events. Ensuring her death prompted long-term precautionary measures and daily reminders of the dangers of thoughtless pranks. It was January 15th, 2016, when 19-year-old Amelia Finch made a decision that would cost her everything. Working part-time at a local coffee shop while studying environmental science, Amelia was known for her adventurous spirit and eagerness to please her friends. That weekend, she joined her college buddies Mason and Rhea at a remote lakeside cabin in northern Minnesota for what was supposed to be a fun winter getaway. Mason, a 20-year-old barista with an impulsive streak, had been documenting increasingly risky winter dares for social media. Amelia had no idea she was being misled into believing the ice was safe when none of them had actually checked it. Rhea, 19 and working retail, was always ready with her camera, eager to capture the next viral moment. The trio had no idea that a midweek warm spell followed by an overnight refreeze had created dangerously deceptive ice conditions on the lake. The challenge seemed simple enough. Walk 25 yards onto the frozen lake to plant a flag while being filmed. Mason joked that the ice was tested and safe, but none of them had actually checked its thickness or brought any safety equipment. No throw ropes, no ice picks, nothing that could help in an emergency. As afternoon's shadows grew longer, Amelia stepped confidently onto what appeared to be solid ice near the shoreline. Her winter boots crunched on the surface as Mason and Rhea recorded from the safety of the dock. The first 10 yards felt secure, but then she began hearing hollow sounds beneath her feet. Hairline cracks started appearing around her boots. At roughly 20 yards from shore, near a drainage inlet where the ice was thinnest, disaster struck. A small dark patch had formed near the inlet. Something ice safety experts later said was a telltale sign of weak spots caused by current flow. No one noticed it in time. The surface suddenly sagged beneath her weight, then gave way completely. Amelia plunged chest deep into the near-freezing water, her body immediately going into shock from the temperature. The icy water was a brutal 34 degrees Fahrenheit. Her heavy winter clothing became waterlogged within seconds, dragging her down. Every attempt to pull herself onto the ice edge only broke off more chunks, widening the hole. Her gloves couldn't grip the slippery surface, and panic set in as the cold began shutting down her motor functions. Mason and Rhea screamed from shore, but couldn't risk walking onto the unstable ice themselves. They threw a branch and an extension cord toward her, but both fell short of the expanding hole. Within 3 minutes, the frigid water had sapped Amelia's strength completely. Her coordination failed, her head began dipping below the surface repeatedly, and she aspirated the icy water. As her friends frantically called 911, Amelia's movements became weaker. The cold had overwhelmed her body's ability to function. She slipped beneath the surface one final time, leaving only bubbles and her knit hat floating in the dark water. Fire and dive teams arrived 45 minutes later, using specialized ice rescue equipment to recover her body from 12 feet of water. The average survival time in 34 degrees Fahrenheit water is less than 10 minutes without flotation or self-rescue gear. By the time rescuers reached the lake, her chances had already been lost to the cold. The medical examiner determined she had drowned due to cold water incapacitation, with the rapid temperature shock preventing any chance of self-rescue. The tragedy prompted the county to install warning signs about ice safety and launch public education campaigns about the dangers of early season ice. Mason and Rhea completed mandatory water safety courses, forever changed by witnessing their friends' final moments. What began as a harmless winter dare had ended in the loss of a promising young life, all because no one understood that ice safety requires more than just appearances. It was November 7th, 2016, when 19-year-old Cordelia Hayes would pay the ultimate price for her reckless deception at a desert bungee jumping tower in Arizona. Cordelia was a psychology student, known for her impulsive nature and obsession with creating viral social media content. Investigation of her social media accounts would later reveal an escalating pattern of increasingly dangerous stunts, each carefully documented and shared with her growing online following. She arrived at the purpose-built jumping tower with 3 sorority sisters. The facility featured a permanent structure rising 250 feet above a rocky canyon, specifically designed for bungee operations. What her friends didn't know was that Cordelia had lied extensively on her booking form. She claimed to be 21 and listed previous bungee jumping experience that didn't exist. Her fabricated credentials would later be discovered during the investigation when authorities cross-referenced her claims with actual jump records. The tower was experiencing an unusually busy day, with multiple groups cycling through. Staff members were managing higher than normal volumes, creating an environment where attention to detail became compromised. During the safety briefing, Witnesses reported that Cordelia was more focused on adjusting her hair and checking her wireless microphone than listening to critical instructions. Her inexperience showed as she struggled with the harness-fitting process, but her false confidence prevented her from asking for clarification. The jump master fitted her with a standard safety system consisting of a full-body harness plus ankle cuffs. However, Cordelia's distraction led her to misadjust the harness after the demonstration. The staff member, dealing with cue pressure, failed to conduct the thorough double-check that protocol demanded. Cordelia was unaware that her harness had been improperly routed through the friction buckles, with the webbing only partially threaded through the mechanism. Her ankle cuffs were positioned too low on her ankles and inadequately tightened, sitting below the ankle bones rather than securely above them. Positioning the cuffs below the malleolus allowed them to slide downward rapidly once the cord was loaded under full force. Arms flailing wildly as she ignored proper form instructions. Her uncontrolled movements during freefall created rotational forces that stressed the improperly fitted equipment. As the bungee cord reached maximum extension and began rebounding, the partially threaded harness buckles began slipping under extreme forces. The loosely positioned ankle cuffs started sliding downward off her feet, rotating and losing their grip entirely. As the cuffs slipped away, the full load transferred to the misrouted harness. The partially threaded webbing continued sliding through the friction buckles until the harness could no longer maintain support. The impact caused massive blunt force trauma throughout her body. She was pronounced dead at the scene despite immediate emergency response efforts. State regulatory authorities launched a comprehensive investigation that exposed multiple safety violations at the facility. The operator faced criminal negligence charges and lost their operating license. New state regulations were implemented, requiring additional safety checks and staff certification, with Cordelia's case cited as the primary catalyst for these local regulatory changes. It was September 22, 2015, when 38-year-old Shepard Knox's professional paranoia would prove tragically insufficient to protect him from a calculated act of sabotage at a Colorado bridge. Shepard worked as a security consultant specializing in risk assessment and vulnerability analysis. His methodical nature and deep skepticism had made him highly sought after by companies looking to identify potential threats. What brought Shepard to the high bridge wasn't personal thrill-seeking, but professional duty. He had been contracted by an insurance company to conduct a safety evaluation of extreme sports venues, requiring him to experience the operations firsthand. The bridge jumping facility had recently undergone significant staff turnover, creating gaps in security protocols. Access control to the equipment storage shed was under revision, and a new camera surveillance system remained only partially installed. Shepard arrived with his characteristic attention to detail, immediately noting security vulnerabilities. He casually inquired about tamper-evident seals on equipment, only to learn that such measures were scheduled to arrive the following week. The bungee cord selected for his jump appeared completely normal during visual inspection. What couldn't be detected was subtle sabotage that would only be discovered through forensic analysis. Shepard executed a clean dive from the platform, positioned 280 feet above the rocky riverbed. The bungee cord initially performed exactly as expected, stretching smoothly through the first phase of his descent. As the cord approached the maximum extension, it catastrophically failed at the anchor point attachment. The cascade failure happened rapidly as the compromised stitching gave way under load. Observers heard distinct snapping sounds before complete separation occurred. Shepard found himself in free fall for the remaining distance to the rocky riverbed below. The impact at high speed caused massive polytrauma, with severe head and thoracoabdominal injuries that proved immediately fatal. The site was immediately shut down and all equipment quarantined. Forensic analysis revealed evidence of deliberate tampering, microscopic cuts in the anchor point stitching that had been carefully concealed. Investigators concluded the stitching had been sabotaged while the cord was stored coiled. When the anchor loops were fully exposed and easy to access, investigation of facility access logs revealed unauthorized entry to the equipment storage area 3 days prior. Security footage analysis identified a recently terminated employee who had gained access using an unreturned keycard. Digital forensics recovered deleted text messages from the suspect's phone, expressing anger over his dismissal and threats against the facility. When confronted with this evidence, the former employee eventually admitted to the sabotage, claiming he had only intended to cause equipment failure, not death. The facility immediately implemented tamper-evident seals on all equipment, restricted storage access with comprehensive surveillance, and updated inspection protocols requiring forensic-level examination of anchor points and load-bearing connections. Shepard's death became a case study in the security consulting firm's training materials, ensuring that his expertise would continue protecting others from similar threats. It was May 14, 2016, when 31-year-old Lorelei Finn's expertise in meteorology proved tragically insufficient at a desert bungee platform in New Mexico. Lorelei worked as a senior meteorologist for the Regional Weather Service, respected for her meticulous atmospheric analysis and ability to identify subtle weather pattern changes others missed. Her reputation for accuracy made her the go-to forecaster for critical weather events affecting public safety across the southwestern United States, with colleagues often seeking her expertise on complex atmospheric phenomena and severe weather prediction models. She had spent several days analyzing comprehensive weather models and real-time atmospheric data from multiple sources, cross-referencing satellite imagery and ground-based observations to confirm ideal conditions for outdoor recreational activities. The high-pressure system dominating the region showed remarkable stability, with no significant weather disturbances predicted for the entire southwestern corridor over the next 48-hour period, according to all major forecasting systems. Lorelei arrived with colleague Joseph, a skilled field technician specializing in atmospheric measurement equipment and data collection protocols, to document microclimate conditions for a research project studying canyon wind patterns and their effects on local weather systems. The facility's 300-foot jump platform was equipped with sophisticated weather monitoring stations providing continuous data on wind velocity, atmospheric pressure, and temperature variations throughout the day. Every instrument confirmed optimal jumping conditions: light winds under 5 miles per hour, crystal clear skies with unlimited visibility, and steady barometric pressure unchanged for 18 hours. Lorelei verified all data against National Weather Service reports and airport weather stations, and even checked the facility's backup sensors to ensure accuracy and cross-validate the readings. The desert environment appeared perfectly tranquil, with normal temperature patterns and consistently low humidity levels remaining stable. Every meteorological indicator suggested that favorable conditions would persist throughout the afternoon session without any atmospheric disturbances. Several miles away, a small thunderstorm had been dissipating, producing faint streaks of virga that evaporated before reaching ground. Unknown to anyone, a pocket of cooled air broke away from this formation, creating a dry microburst that sent an unexpected lateral gust across the canyon, just as Lorelei jumped. As the descending air mass hit the desert ground, it spread outward horizontally, generating a sudden lateral gust that funneled directly across the jump path. Lorelei's descent began as calculated, following the predicted trajectory. However, the sudden sideways wind caused her to swing toward the platform's edge, dramatically increasing the angular load on the bungee cord's anchor point. Investigators discovered this abrasion, combined with undetected internal fiber deterioration from hundreds of previous jumps, had critically weakened the cord's integrity at the anchor point. The wear was concealed beneath the outer protective sheath, making it impossible to identify during routine visual inspections. As Lorelei reached maximum extension, the compromised section failed, causing the cord to snap completely. Lorelei fell to the canyon floor below. Emergency personnel responded quickly, but the coroner confirmed her death was caused by massive blunt force trauma from the high-velocity impact. Joseph's observations of the wind change and dust patterns proved crucial to the investigators' understanding. Forensic analysis revealed extensive abrasion damage and fiber rupture at the anchor point, with the microburst identified as a contributing factor. The facility implemented stricter inspection protocols, mandatory replacement schedules, and improved anchor point padding. Local authorities required enhanced weather monitoring and operator training for all canyon-based facilities. Lorelei's death became a case study in meteorological risk and equipment safety, leading to policy changes and a memorial research grant for micro-weather hazard understanding, ensuring her legacy would help protect future adventurers. It was March 26, 2017, in Bristol, England. The morning air was heavy with drizzle, the pitch already slick before kickoff. To the players, it was just another university friendly, meant to sharpen form before finals week. But as the clouds hung low over Coombe Dingle Sports Complex, the uneven field would soon expose the thin line between pain management and fatal oversight. Connor Hale, 21, was a third-year biology major at the University of Bristol. He'd built a name on the club's rugby team as a fearless inside center, known for clean, hard hits that drew attention from regional scouts. Off the field, he was methodical, a student who studied anatomy late into the night, fascinated by how the body breaks and repairs. He played through injuries more than he admitted, often strapping his ribs with tape rather than reporting pain. Sitting out meant losing his starting spot, and with one last season left, he couldn't risk it. To keep up appearances, he'd skipped medical follow-ups for a bruised rib sustained 3 weeks earlier. Rugby at the university level required no mandatory rib padding, and while some players wore compression gear with protective panels, Connor dismissed it as restrictive. His coach trusted him to know his limits, though unbeknownst to them, the earlier injury had likely caused a small subcapsular hematoma in his spleen, a slow, contained bleed that left the organ fragile beneath his lower ribs. The Cardiff match was meant to be routine, a test for lineup rotations before intercollegiate finals. The rain had worsened since morning, turning the grass into a thin layer of mud that made footing unpredictable. Players slipped frequently, and tackles hit with more momentum than control. In the second half, Cardiff's inside center, a heavier, stockier player, charged downfield. Connor lunged high to stop him. His left shoulder caught the opponent's raised knee mid-stride, the collision audible even from the sideline. He hit the ground, gasped, then stood. He waved off the trainer. The crowd clapped, assuming it was routine. Footage from the sideline shows him moving slower afterward. Between plays, he pressed his forearm against his ribs, pausing longer than usual before realigning in defense. 2 minutes later, he staggered again. Teammates said he looked disoriented but still tried to follow the ball. Then, during a turnover, he stopped entirely, clutching his left side before collapsing face first near midfield. Players froze. The referee halted the match immediately. The trainer sprinted across the field. Hale was unresponsive, breathing shallowly. Medics recorded a rapid pulse and plummeting blood pressure, clear signs of internal hemorrhage. What appeared to be a cracked rib was later confirmed as a ruptured spleen, the earlier impact having torn tissue weakened by prior bruising. Internal bleeding had begun almost immediately, worsening with every movement after the tackle. On-site medics performed chest compressions for 8 minutes before loading him into the ambulance. He went into cardiac arrest en route and was pronounced dead at Southmead Hospital less than an hour later. The university released a brief statement citing medical review protocols and suspended all spring fixtures pending investigation. No disciplinary findings were made. The incident was ruled an accidental sports injury. Hale's parents declined offers for a memorial match. His number was quietly retired from the club roster, and the local sponsor withdrew from collegiate rugby that summer. It was February 3rd, 2015, in Duluth, Minnesota. The community ice rink was unusually quiet that Tuesday night, the chill from the compressors clinging to the air in pale mist. Parents sat scattered along the bleachers, gloves folded, coffee steaming, watching the local high school league's late match drag into its final minutes. Ryan Halverson, 17, was a senior defenseman from East Duluth High. Off the ice, he was reserved, known for his steady temperament and part-time job at a hardware store. On the ice, he was the opposite, physical, relentless, often the first to check and the last to leave a corner fight. He'd been skating since he was 5, training through weekend clinics and scrimmages organized by the Minnesota Youth Hockey Association. Though talented, he'd never been scouted for higher leagues. His plan was to study mechanical engineering after graduation. Hockey culture in northern Minnesota prized toughness. Even in community league games outside Minnesota's sanction, few players wore neck guards, seen as restrictive or unnecessary outside sanctioned tournaments. The rink's semi-contact format blurred the line between safety and intensity. Ryan's gear was standard: a Bauer cage helmet, chest protector, gloves, and shin pads. His jersey hung loose, the back soaked from sweat and condensation. The ice itself was uneven from hours of play, small ruts forming near the goalposts where players had cut hard stops all night. Under those conditions, footing became unpredictable, especially late in a game when exhaustion set in. That night's match was tied 2-2, entering the third period. Both teams were pressing, tempers short, blades scraping louder with each rush. The final minutes saw a series of aggressive scrambles near the crease as players crowded the goalie. Ryan's last shift began with a defensive zone face-off. The puck deflected off a teammate's stick and slid toward their own net. He lunged to block it, skidding forward just as 2 opposing forwards charged in. What followed unfolded in seconds. One player tripped over Ryan's left skate, toppling backward. Another, spinning to avoid the collision, lost balance and fell in from the side. The 3 bodies tangled at the base of the goalpost, the puck vanishing beneath them. The goalie dropped his stick and lunged forward to cover, his own pads catching the edge of the pile. It looked, at first, like a routine crash. Witnesses later said they saw Ryan push himself up, glove pressed to his neck. A red mist spread faintly against the white ice. A skate blade, believed to be from the falling forward, had sliced through the exposed area between helmet and chest guard. He stood halfway, stumbled, and went down again. The referee and goalie reached him first, using a towel and gloves to apply pressure. Players from both teams froze, motionless, except for one skater who waved urgently toward the bench. The bleeding was too rapid. The cut had severed the carotid artery. Emergency responders arrived within 4 minutes. They carried him off through the maintenance tunnel. The crowd was ushered out in silence while the Zamboni crew scraped the area, refilling with hot water that steamed into the cold air. At the hospital, he was pronounced dead less than 20 minutes after the impact. The rink shut down for a week. Officials installed a rule requiring neck guards for all under 18 leagues. Ryan's funeral took place 3 days later at St. Luke's Lutheran Church, a few blocks from his school. The hockey team arrived in full uniform, skates slung over their shoulders, filling 2 front pews beside the coaches. His parents sat nearest the casket, a folded jersey placed over the lid. It was April 14th, 2016, in Tampa, Florida. The afternoon breeze carried the smell of cut grass and pine tar, mixing with the dull thud of baseballs striking netting. It was a typical Thursday pregame practice, quiet except for the steady rhythm of the pitching machine. Ethan E.J. Mendez was 17, a senior shortstop at Jefferson High School. He was known for his quick reactions, an instinctive player who read hops before the ball even touched dirt. Coaches called him reliable, the sort who stayed late after drills to perfect footwork. His father, Carlos Mendez, had been the team's volunteer assistant since freshman year, rarely missing a session. EJ wanted a college scholarship and had been attending weekend showcases hoping for recruiter attention. The team trained at a municipal field bordered by a chain-link fence and shallow bleachers. The infield turf was dry from early season heat, and the batting cage sat just off the third base line. The pitching machine was a twin-wheel model, set to deliver fastballs at roughly 70 miles per hour. It was routine equipment, nothing unusual or faulty. EJ often stood close during rotations to watch timing, a habit he picked up to study other hitters' stances. His father had cautioned him about distance before, but EJ brushed it off as part of improving reaction time. That afternoon, the practice ran behind schedule. The varsity game was only hours away, so drills were compressed into shorter rounds. A teammate, Daniel Ruiz, was up to bat against the machine, taking sharp, low cuts into the net. EJ stood several feet to the right of the cage, helmet off, resting his bat on his shoulder. His father was adjusting the feeder on the machine, occasionally glancing up to check positions. On the sixth pitch of the rotation, the ball came off Daniel's bat earlier than expected, catching the sweet spot square. Instead of driving into the cage netting, it ricocheted straight through the narrow gap near the machine's side guard. Witnesses said the ball changed direction so fast it blurred, giving no chance to react. EJ barely turned his head before it hit him square in the chest, just left of the sternum. The impact made a short, hollow sound, more like a clap than a crack. He staggered back 2 steps, eyes wide, then crumpled onto the dirt. At first, Carlos thought his son had just had the wind knocked out of him. But when EJ didn't move, he ran onto the field. Players froze for a moment, then scattered into action. One teammate sprinted for the defibrillator by the concession stand. Another grabbed a phone and called 911. Carlos started chest compressions, counting out loud, his hands slipping against the front of EJ's jersey. The coach opened the AED, an automated defibrillator, attached the pads, and waited for the device to analyze the rhythm. It advised no shock both times, meaning the heart wasn't in a shockable state. Paramedics arrived about 6 minutes later and took over, continuing CPR all the way to St. Joseph's Hospital. After nearly 40 minutes of attempts, doctors couldn't bring him back. Doctors later concluded that the ball's impact had caused a catastrophic rupture of a coronary vessel and bruising of the heart muscle, a rare form of blunt cardiac trauma distinct from commotio cordis. The force had slammed his heart against the chest wall, tearing tissue and leading to massive internal bleeding within seconds. That's why he collapsed right away, even though there were no visible injuries or broken bones. Specialists noted that such injuries are virtually unsurvivable, even with immediate CPR and AED use. Practice sessions were suspended for several days before resuming. The infield dirt was raked smooth, chalk lines replaced, and equipment rechecked. The existing AED was relocated closer to the dugout, with new signage added for faster access. Carlos Mendez resigned from the booster club 2 weeks later. He donated EJ's gloves to the junior varsity team and stopped attending games entirely. It was October 15th, 2017, when 34-year-old Trevor Hastings, a senior software engineer from Minneapolis, embarked on what would become his final camping adventure to Superior National Forest. Known for his meticulous planning, Trevor had been an avid solo camper for over 15 years, though he primarily ventured out during warmer months. Standing 5 feet 8 inches with a lean build, Trevor possessed a confident personality that sometimes led him to underestimate unfamiliar risks. After completing a stressful project deadline, he desperately needed to escape and capture the stunning fall colors around Lake Superior with his camera. Weather forecasts predicted mild temperatures in the 50s, which seemed perfect for photography. However, Trevor failed to account for the lake effect phenomenon that could cause dramatic overnight temperature drops. Confident in his experience, he packed only a lightweight sleeping bag rated for 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Trevor chose a remote campsite 3.2 miles from the nearest trail access point, beyond cell phone coverage. To capture perfect sunrise shots, he positioned his tent in a slight depression near the water's edge, unknowingly placing himself in a cold air pocket where frigid air would settle. Earlier that evening, Fellow camper Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old nature photographer from Duluth, had set up camp about half a mile away on higher ground. She later testified that she noticed Trevor's tent positioned unusually close to the water and considered warning him about cold air settling in low areas, but decided against approaching a solo camper in the darkness. Late that night, an unexpected Arctic air mass moved across Lake Superior, causing temperatures to plummet to 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Trevor woke in the early morning hours, shivering uncontrollably as his inadequate sleeping bag provided no protection. His hands losing dexterity, he fumbled desperately with matches trying to start a fire, but persistent wind kept extinguishing each attempt. Sarah later reported hearing someone struggling with camping equipment during the night, followed by concerning silence. She considered investigating, but was reluctant to leave her warm shelter in the dangerous conditions. Hours later, Trevor's core body temperature dropped to 95 degrees, triggering early hypothermia. Confusion clouded his analytical mind. Making a fatal decision, Trevor abandoned his tent and began walking toward his car, believing movement would generate body heat. His coordination deteriorated rapidly as hypothermia progressed, causing him to stumble and fall repeatedly. In the pre-dawn hours, with his core temperature at 90 degrees, Trevor collapsed just 0.8 miles from his campsite. His breathing became shallow while his heart rate dropped as his body shut down non-essential functions. Trevor lost consciousness as dawn approached, his body curling into a fetal position among fallen leaves. Death occurred shortly after sunrise when his heart stopped due to hypothermia-induced cardiac arrest. Sarah discovered Trevor's abandoned campsite the next morning when she noticed his tent flaps whipping in the wind with no activity. Concerned, she hiked to the nearest ranger station to report the situation. Search and rescue teams located his body 1.2 miles from the campsite following his erratic trail. The medical examiner confirmed death by severe hypothermia. Investigation revealed Trevor had adequate survival gear in his tent, but panic and hypothermia-induced confusion led to his fatal decision to leave shelter. Sarah's witness testimony helped investigators understand the timeline. His tragic death prompted new Park Service warnings about temperature variations near large bodies of water during fall months. It was June 14, 2016, when 31-year-old Kristen Holloway, a physical therapist from San Francisco, joined a group climbing expedition to Yosemite Valley that would tragically become her final adventure. With her compact athletic frame at 5 feet 4 inches, honed through 8 years of committed rock climbing, Kristen had earned recognition as an intermediate-level climber who possessed a true love for the sport. Her personality was notably optimistic and trusting, often leading her to rely heavily on others' judgment about climbing conditions and safety assessments, rather than making independent evaluations. This trusting nature, while endearing to her climbing partners, sometimes put her at unnecessary risk in the unforgiving granite environment of Yosemite. Kristen had joined this particular group climbing trip to attempt several challenging multi-pitch routes over a long weekend, hoping to push her technical skills to the next level. The group chose to camp directly in the valley to maximize their precious climbing time and minimize daily travel to the towering rock faces. Following the advice of more experienced climbers in her group, Kristen positioned her tent directly beneath the imposing granite walls of El Capitan, in an area popular with climbers for its convenient proximity to the routes. Recent geological surveys had noted increased rockfall activity throughout the park due to repeated freeze-thaw cycles. But this critical safety information wasn't widely publicized among the climbing community. Kristen had set up her tent in the evening in what appeared to be a perfectly safe zone, approximately 150 feet from the base of the massive cliff face. The location seemed ideal, offering easy access to climbing routes while providing what she believed was adequate distance from any potential rockfall danger. In the early morning hours, thermal expansion from the previous day's intense heat caused a critical stress fracture to develop in a granite slab positioned 800 feet above the valley floor. The initial crack propagated rapidly through the rock face, destabilizing a massive 2,000-pound granite block measuring 4 feet by 6 feet. Kristen was awakened by a sharp cracking sound echoing through the valley. but couldn't identify its source. In the pre-dawn darkness, moments later, the massive granite block broke free from the cliff face and began its deadly descent, accelerating rapidly due to gravity's relentless pull. The rock struck a protruding ledge 400 feet down, fragmenting into 3 large pieces that continued falling at different trajectories toward the valley floor. The largest fragment, weighing approximately 800 pounds, struck the ground just 12 feet from Kristen's tent. The tremendous impact created a powerful shockwave that knocked Kristen from her sleeping bag and caused her tent to collapse partially around her. A second fragment, weighing 600 pounds, bounced violently off the first impact point and struck Kristen's tent directly with devastating force. The massive rock crushed through the tent fabric like paper and struck Kristen across her torso, instantly fracturing her spine at the T12 vertebra. The enormous weight compressed her chest cavity completely, crushing her ribs and causing immediate catastrophic internal bleeding from severe organ damage. Other campers were awakened by the thunderous impact and immediately called for emergency assistance. Park rangers and medical personnel arrived within minutes, but could only confirm Kristen's death at the scene. It required specialized equipment and 6 rescue personnel to lift the granite fragment off Kristen's body for recovery. In response to the tragic incident, camping policies were revised to ban overnight camping within 200 feet of cliff faces in areas marked as high risk for rockfall. It was September 12, 2015, when 45-year-old Nash Smith, a research botanist for the University of Washington, embarked on what would become his final collecting expedition to Olympic National Forest. Standing 5 feet 10 inches with a slender build typical of an academic researcher, Nash was known for his extensive knowledge of Pacific Northwest flora and his confident intellectual approach to fieldwork. His personality was notably self-assured and scholarly, sometimes leading him to overestimate his expertise in areas outside his primary specialization. While Nash possessed a PhD in plant biology and decades of experience with edible plants, his knowledge of fungi identification was surprisingly limited despite his academic credentials. Nash planned a solo 3-day camping trip to the remote Ho River Valley to collect plant specimens for his research on old-growth forest ecosystems. The area was renowned for its diverse mushroom populations, and Nash decided to supplement his camping meals with foraged fungi, confident that his general botanical knowledge would transfer to mushroom identification. His campsite was positioned 3.5 miles from the nearest ranger station, deep in the temperate rainforest environment. Nash carried basic field guides, but relied primarily on his academic training to identify what he believed would be obviously edible species. On Saturday morning, Nash discovered a cluster of pristine white mushrooms with broad caps growing near fallen logs in the damp forest understory. The mushrooms appeared perfect for harvesting, with their clean white appearance and substantial size making them seem like an ideal addition to his planned lunch. Nash fatally misidentified the deadly destroying angel mushrooms, scientifically known as Amanita bisporigera, as harmless oyster mushrooms due to their superficially similar white appearance and broad caps. His academic confidence prevented him from consulting his field guides more carefully. Around midday, Nash cooked and consumed approximately 4 ounces of the poisonous mushrooms as part of his lunch, completely unaware that he had just ingested some of the most lethal toxins found in nature. The amatoxins in the mushrooms immediately began attacking his liver and kidney cells, though symptoms wouldn't manifest for several hours. By evening, Nash experienced the first phase of amatoxin poisoning with severe nausea, explosive vomiting, and violent diarrhea that continued relentlessly through the night. He lost approximately 3 liters of vital fluids, leading to dangerous dehydration and critical electrolyte imbalances. Sunday morning brought a deceptive recovery period where symptoms temporarily subsided, convincing Nash that he had simply experienced food poisoning that was resolving naturally. This false improvement is characteristic of amatoxin poisoning and often prevents victims from seeking emergency medical attention. By Sunday afternoon, the second devastating phase began as amatoxins caused massive liver cell death and acute hepatic failure. Nash developed excruciating abdominal pain, yellowing jaundice, and severe confusion as deadly toxins accumulated in his bloodstream. As Monday dawned, he was in complete liver failure with kidney shutdown, slipping into a hepatic coma as his organs systematically failed. Nash died later that morning from multi-organ failure caused by amatoxin poisoning, alone in his tent deep in the forest. Park rangers discovered Nash's campsite several days later after he failed to return his rental car as scheduled. His body was found in his tent along with the remaining cooked mushrooms. Toxicological analysis and post-mortem examination of his liver and kidneys confirmed death by amatoxin poisoning, showing massive cellular destruction. Investigators reconstructed the timeline of his symptoms and ingestion based on this evidence. His death led to enhanced educational programs about the extreme dangers of amateur mushroom foraging in national forest areas. It was May 8, 2018, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Early morning light was low over a row of flat roofs, and morning moisture made the black tar wet and shiny. Marcus Hale was 23 years old and went to community college. He made roof running videos for a small channel. He worked nights at a cafe and trained on weekends. He practiced gap jumps in gyms first, using tape marks to measure takeoff and landing. He told friends this would be the last big one before finals week. At first light, Marcus and two friends went upstairs inside the building and pushed through a metal door. The roof was standard built-up tar and gravel with a low parapet about 18 inches high. Across the alley, the second roof sat about 4 feet lower, with an 18-inch parapet. They measured the gap with a tape, roughly 11 feet across with a drop of about 4 feet to the landing surface. On camera, the space looked longer than it did in person. They set a phone on a small tripod and did walkthroughs. Rubber soles left light marks on damp tar. The run-up gave Marcus about 30 feet to build speed, plant, and lift. He scuffed his shoes on a rough patch for grip and wiped the takeoff spot with a towel, but the tar remained slick. Sirens sounded a few blocks away, and the group started rushing. One friend called out the count and held the frame. Marcus took 3 practice runs to mark his steps. On the 4th try, he ran harder, head level, arms set for swing. His plant foot hit the damp edge. The shoe slid a few inches, and the takeoff turned into a low, flat jump. He reached for the opposite wall, hit the edge with both hands, and could not hold on. His body swung and fell back into the gap. The two friends ran to the edge and looked down into the narrow space between buildings. One called 911 and gave the cross streets. The other went back through the door to reach the alley from the ground level. Police and fire units arrived soon after the call. An EMS crew took over and moved carefully in the tight space. Officers taped off the alley, set a safety perimeter, and kept people away. The phone and tripod were collected, and the friends gave their names. A supervisor asked the building manager to lock the roof door. Detectives spoke with a neighbor who heard the slide and with 2 workers who had been unloading a van nearby. The friends explained the plan and showed earlier gym videos on a second phone. They pointed out the wet tar and the towel at the takeoff spot. One detective walked out the run-up and the gap, wrote down the numbers, and took photos of both walls. By mid-morning, investigators finished their scene work. The coroner later listed blunt force trauma as the cause of death. Officers cleared the alley and returned the block to regular traffic. Building management replaced the temporary door latch with a lock and posted a notice warning against unauthorized access. The funeral took place that weekend at a neighborhood church, and the seats were full. His coach from the gym spoke for a few minutes about caution and skill. Police treated the case as a trespass-related accident with no sign of foul play. Building owners added locked doors and new warning signs, and the property manager sent a memo to tenants about roof access and safety. In the small parkour community nearby, the video turned into a training note rather than a clip to share. Coaches repeated 3 points in classes the next week. Do a dry run on dry ground. Do not rush a takeoff when the surface is wet. And measure more than you trust what a camera shows. The block settled back to its routine, but the damp marks at the takeoff spot stayed visible for a day, a plain reminder of how a few inches of slip can change a jump that looked simple on paper. It was March 18th, 2018, when 20-year-old Noah Sterling's trusting nature would lead her into a deadly trap inside a Chicago high-rise. Working nights as a security guard while saving for nursing school, Noah was known for her responsible demeanor and dedication to helping others. Her compassionate personality made her vulnerable to manipulation by those she considered friends. That night, Noah was off duty when her boyfriend and two friends convinced her to let them into the downtown office building where she worked. The boyfriend, employed at a warehouse, had a history of pushing boundaries for social media content. His friend worked in retail and carried a camera, while the third member held a restaurant position and instigated their reckless adventures. The group claimed they wanted to explore the supposedly haunted upper floors for a ghost hunting video. Noah reluctantly agreed, using her security access to bypass after-hours restrictions she had been drinking earlier, which clouded her judgment about the serious protocol breach. The freight elevator had been out of service for maintenance, with shaft doors secured but not locked. Warning signs marked the area as dangerous, but the group ignored these safety measures, pursuing dramatic footage. The elevator car sat parked at the basement level, leaving a deadly void above. What happened next revealed their cruel plan. One friend deliberately dropped a phone down the elevator shaft, then claimed it was accidental. They pressured Noah to climb down the maintenance ladder to retrieve it, playing on her responsibility as the building's security guard. Noah never realized she was being deliberately tricked into a situation they knew was unsafe. Noah opened the shaft door on the 8th floor and began descending into darkness. The maintenance ladder, uninspected for over 2 years, showed corrosion invisible in dim lighting. Her friends positioned themselves above with phone flashlights, supposedly helping, but actually filming her ordeal. Maintenance records later revealed the ladder hadn't been inspected since 2014, despite state safety codes requiring annual checks. At the 5th floor level, disaster struck when a corroded ladder rung gave way under her weight. The metal, weakened by years of moisture, snapped when she shifted her full body weight onto it. Noah lost her grip and fell backward into the black elevator shaft void. Her 60-foot fall was broken by multiple impacts, with cable guides and support beams protruding from shaft walls. Each collision caused severe spinal and internal trauma. She finally crashed onto the elevator car roof, parked at the basement level. The impact with the solid metal surface caused immediate cardiac arrest and massive internal bleeding. Her friends called emergency services, but specialized equipment needed to safely access the elevator shaft would take precious time. Emergency responders required 35 minutes to reach Noah, using high-angle rescue techniques. In high-rise rescues, confined space entry and fall victim recovery can exceed 30 minutes, even with specialized gear, a delay fatal for anyone with blunt force trauma. By the time they extracted her, any resuscitation chance had passed. The medical examiner confirmed instant death upon impact. Investigation revealed the building management's failure to properly maintain the ladder system, leading to significant citations. Her 3 friends faced serious criminal charges, with her boyfriend receiving the harshest sentence for orchestrating the deadly prank. The building implemented security upgrades, including locked elevator shaft access and continuous monitoring. New regulations required regular inspection of emergency ladder systems in commercial buildings citywide. Noah's family used her life insurance to establish a scholarship fund for aspiring nurses, ensuring her dream of helping others would continue through future healthcare workers. What began as a night of supposed fun ended with a young woman's death, proving that even those closest to us can harbor dangerous intentions when social media fame becomes more important than human life. It was November 3rd, 2017, when 19-year-old Jennifer Paulson, passion for urban photography, would lead her into a deadly trap at an abandoned Detroit factory. Working part-time at a bookstore while studying photography, Jennifer was known for her artistic eye and love of documenting urban decay. She had always explored during daylight hours and never alone until this fateful night. Jennifer had joined an online urban exploration group that challenged members to spend entire nights in dangerous abandoned locations, filming the experience for social media. The peer pressure pushed her beyond her usual safety boundaries. That evening, Jennifer met up with Marco, a 21-year-old warehouse picker who ran a prank channel, and Tia, a 20-year-old art student easily influenced by group dynamics. They had chosen the abandoned factory specifically for its reputation as one of the city's most structurally unsound buildings. City inspection records later showed the structure had been red-tagged years earlier for severe roof leaks and termite damage. Warnings long ignored by trespassers. The factory had been closed for 15 years, with floors severely weakened by water damage and missing floorboards. The third floor showed visible deterioration, with soft spots and warning signs noting structural instability. Marco had planned a jump scare to capture Jennifer's reaction, positioning a hidden sheet of metal nearby to drop while she photographed. Jennifer had no idea he was setting up a prank, or that he'd led her onto one of the most unstable areas of the floor. As midnight approached, Jennifer set up her tripod near a large window. Marco positioned himself with the metal sheet while Tia filmed from the doorway, ready to document what they expected would be harmless. Marco released the sheet metal, creating a thunderous crash. Jennifer startled violently and stepped backward onto water-damaged plywood concealing rotted floor joists beneath. The panel fractured completely. Jennifer fell through to the second floor, but the impact caused another section of compromised flooring to give way, sending her plummeting to ground level in a cascade of splintered wood and debris. During her descent, Jennifer struck multiple splintered joists and metal debris, sustaining severe spinal fractures and internal injuries. A protruding piece of rebar caused a deep abdominal wound, adding to her trauma. She landed on broken concrete and rusted equipment. The impact caused significant bleeding and left her completely paralyzed below the waist, trapped in the cold, dark building with life-threatening injuries. Inside the steel-reinforced structure, cell signals barely registered. Emergency calls dropped repeatedly, forcing them to run outside before contact could be made. They applied pressure to her wounds using clothing and ran to find an exterior door to guide emergency responders. Emergency access was delayed by the building's size and debris blocking entry points. Responders eventually reached Jennifer using specialized equipment, but her vital signs had deteriorated rapidly due to blood loss and cold exposure. Jennifer was pronounced dead at the scene after unsuccessful resuscitation attempts. The medical examiner cited multiple blunt force injuries with hemorrhage and exposure as contributing factors. The property owner secured building entries and coordinated with officials to increase patrols around abandoned structures. Marco faced charges for trespass and reckless conduct tied to his staged prank. A campus exhibition of Jennifer's work included safety briefings for student photographers about structural hazards. When exploring abandoned locations, her death became a chilling reminder that urban exploration demands respect for decaying structures and that chasing social media content can exact the ultimate price. It was June 18, 2016, in London, United Kingdom. The summer air was bright and clear, company banners flapping lightly above a courtyard where staff gathered for a charity event. The setting was festive, but behind the cheers and music, one participant's overconfidence would turn the day into an incident that left colleagues shaken. Melissa Carter, 37, worked as an accountant for a mid-sized financial services firm. She had built a reputation inside the office for her sharp competitiveness and frequent belittling of others. Colleagues described her as ambitious and abrasive, someone who sought to prove superiority whenever possible. Outside of work, she had no history in athletics, yet she enjoyed showcasing boldness in social settings. For Melissa, the fundraiser presented less a chance to support a cause than an opportunity to assert dominance over peers. The event featured a series of games and challenges on the company grounds, staged to raise money for a local hospital. Staff volunteers had arranged simple activities, including a low balance beam for participants to walk across while co-workers cheered. For safety, optional nets and mats were provided. The terrain itself was controlled, a flat courtyard with temporary scaffolding and platforms assembled for the demonstrations. It was intended to be a light-hearted environment, requiring no special training. When Melissa's turn came, she rejected the balance beam entirely. She insisted a rope be strung between two scaffolding posts at a height of about 15 feet. Her co-workers objected, pointing out that the stunt was unnecessary and riskier than anything planned. Safety mats and a net were offered, but she dismissed them, calling those who used them weak. The request was not part of the schedule, but under pressure, a few staff reluctantly improvised, tying a rope taut between the posts. From the ground, the rope swayed lightly in the breeze, thinner and less stable than anything meant for this type of performance. As she climbed the scaffolding, co-workers exchanged uneasy looks. Some suggested stopping the attempt, but Melissa waved them off, smirking as she positioned herself at the edge. With dozens of eyes on her, she stepped onto the rope. For a few seconds, she appeared steady, one foot in front of the other, arms extended for balance. Staff clapped half-heartedly, but the atmosphere carried more tension than celebration. Halfway across, the rope shifted beneath her shoe. Witnesses later described how her expression changed instantly, from smug confidence to alarm. She slipped sideways, grabbing at the rope to catch herself. The force twisted her wrist sharply, leaving her hanging for barely a second before gravity took control. She fell hard against the scaffolding frame, her torso striking the metal crossbar with full weight before she hit the ground below. The impact was loud enough to draw gasps from the crowd. Several witnesses recalled the thud and the way her body folded on contact, convinced it meant broken ribs and internal damage. Blood spread from her mouth as her lungs filled, visible even to those at the back of the courtyard. Several staff members rushed forward, while others turned away. Her chest showed no normal movement, and the blood in her airway left little doubt of catastrophic trauma. But panic drove the event's first aid team to begin chest compressions anyway. Emergency services arrived within minutes, called by one of the staff. Yet by the time she was loaded into the ambulance, she was unresponsive. Melissa Carter was pronounced dead at the hospital that same afternoon. In the following weeks, bitterness outweighed sympathy. Many employees openly remarked that Melissa's arrogance had caused her own death, and some admitted they felt little grief over the outcome. While a small plaque was installed in the office lobby, it was largely ignored, with several staff privately calling it undeserved. It was October 22nd, 2016, in Toronto, Canada. The air outside carried the chill of late fall, but inside an abandoned warehouse, the quiet was broken by the hum of camera equipment and scattered voices. A group of film students were working on a scene they hoped would impress jurors at an upcoming student festival. But by night's end, their project would be overshadowed by a fatal accident. Ethan Marsh was 25, a third-year film student with a reputation for chasing authenticity over safety. He had grown up on action movies, studying the raw energy of practical stunts, and believed audiences could always spot a fake. Classmates described him as abrasive, often dismissing suggestions he saw as timid. He wanted recognition, not just as a director, but as someone willing to risk himself for realism. Sponsors and faculty offered no funding for this project. Ethan scraped together equipment rentals through savings and student credit. The warehouse offered the kind of gritty backdrop he favored: exposed steel beams, concrete floors, and high windows leaking late daylight. For Ethan, the environment was a stage. The scene called for a chase, one character escaping by sprinting across a rope suspended high above the floor. Commercial crews would have built platforms, nets, and safety harnesses. Ethan had none of these. His classmates objected, suggesting camera tricks or editing cheats, but he dismissed them. He insisted the shot would only work if the actor, in this case himself, crossed the rope without precautions. That Saturday, they carried in a heavy coil of rope and fixed it between two parallel steel beams about 18 feet off the ground. The knots were rushed, pulled tight, but without professional rigging hardware. Classmates suggested lowering the setup or using a balance beam on the ground, but Ethan waved it off. With the daylight fading, he was more concerned about losing the look he wanted than about safety. As the cameras rolled, tension built. The crew shifted uneasily, waiting for Ethan to climb. He mounted one of the beams using a ladder, positioning himself with the rope stretched taut in front of him. The rope sagged slightly under his weight before he even placed both feet on it. One crew member muttered that it didn't look secure. Ethan steadied himself, spread his arms, and called for the take to begin. However, almost immediately through his first step, the rope twisted unexpectedly. Witnesses later recalled the sound of fibers straining as Ethan crouched, trying to regain balance. He grinned at the cameras and mouthed something, then shifted forward. But the second step proved fatal. His shoe slipped on the rope's fraying surface, and his body pitched sideways. The fall lasted only a moment. From nearly 20 feet up, he landed hard on his back with a dull thud that echoed through the warehouse. At first, he tried to breathe, but his chest barely rose, and within seconds, his body went limp. Crew members screamed and dropped equipment, rushing to him as it became clear he was unresponsive. Attempts at resuscitation began immediately, the urgency rising when he failed to respond to chest compressions. A stagehand grabbed a phone and dialed emergency services while others cleared space around him. Paramedics arrived within minutes, noting a faint pulse and believing at first he might survive, since there were no obvious external injuries. They worked quickly to stabilize him before rushing him to the hospital. Doctors fought to keep him alive for several hours, but the internal bleeding could not be controlled. He was pronounced dead later that evening in the trauma unit, the autopsy later confirming a partial tear of the aorta as the cause. Police questioned the crew, but determined the event accidental, citing lack of safety protocols and alcohol-free conditions. In the aftermath, the project collapsed. The footage, including the moments leading to Ethan's fall, was seized by faculty and placed under lock, deemed too disturbing to be used or screened. Several crew members withdrew from the film program entirely, shaken by the experience and unwilling to continue. It was August 19, 2017, in Orlando, Florida. The theme park had just closed, the bright music silenced and rides stilled, leaving the grounds in artificial twilight. Maintenance crews moved in behind the departing crowds, but in one corner of the park, a group of seasonal employees lingered where they should not have been. Brianna Lowell was 19, a seasonal hire working concessions and occasionally assigned to crowd control near rides. Friends knew her as bold and mocking of authority, often slipping into staff-only areas for thrills. She was restless, ambitious, and dismissive of rules, bragging that she would one day leave the job behind for something more exciting. Risk was part of her personality. Peer attention mattered. The area she entered was meant only for trained staff, service platforms, catwalks, and cables above heavy machinery. It was narrow, dimly lit, and crowded with beams, gears, and drive systems, all marked with warnings about crushing hazards. To Brianna, those signs looked more like dares. On that night, she and 4 friends slipped past a gate after closing. They gathered beneath the skeleton of a roller coaster, where floodlights cast sharp shadows over steel beams. Brianna spotted a thick service rope tied between 2 access points above a cluster of machinery. Laughing, she told the others she would walk across it. They urged her to stop, pointing out the drop and the gears below, but she waved them off. Alcohol, smuggled earlier in the shift, had lowered her judgment further. She climbed onto the rope, balancing barefoot. The line sagged under her weight, her arms spread wide as she inched forward. Her friends stood on the platform, torn between nervous laughter and genuine fear. The rope swayed with each movement. Halfway across, she turned her head to grin back at them. In that moment, her foot slipped against the rope's fibers and she fell. Her friends later described her striking a beam before plunging into the mechanical pit. She landed in the gears of an idle drive assembly, and the force crushed her chest on impact. Her scream was short, cut off by the grinding sound of her body striking metal. One friend bolted toward security while the others fled, sobbing and panicked. Security staff arrived instantaneously, finding Brianna unresponsive, pinned awkwardly between beams. Blood had pooled beneath her and spread across the machinery. Her body was recovered only after maintenance workers disassembled part of the structure. The autopsy later confirmed massive blunt force trauma to the chest as the cause of death. Behind closed doors, security staff who witnessed the recovery admitted the scene was among the worst they had encountered. Details were withheld from the public, but among employees, the story circulated quietly as a reminder of how quickly recklessness could end in disaster. It was July the 22nd, 2017, in Yosemite National Park, California. A narrow ribbon of webbing stretched between 2 rock points near Taft Point. The drop below was more than 2,000 feet to the valley floor. Evan Cole was 28 years old and worked at a gear shop in Reno. He spent weekends on slacklines and highlines. Cole was known for careful knots, neat anchors, and long practice sessions. More on clean technique than social media attention. He kept records of each session in a spiral notebook. That morning, he wanted to make a clean walk across the line without safety ropes for the camera. At sunrise, a small crew set up a 1-inch line about 120 feet long across a gap near the overlook, under park guidelines with required permits. They built 2 separate anchor systems using slings, bolts, and backup webbing, with edge protection at contact points. Tag lines kept the slack organized during setup. Most walkers attached a safety leash. Cole chose to go without one. Tourists began arriving as the sun came over the ridge. A park map sign moved slightly in a breeze that came and went. A handheld wind meter at the setup showed 6 to 10 miles per hour with occasional stronger gusts. The crew checked tension, checked knots, and checked the edge protection and leash snag checks at the anchors in case someone with a leash fell back into the rock. Cole walked back and forth at the start anchor in bare feet, wiping dust off his feet. He stood up, shook out his arms, and stepped onto the webbing. The line moved under him as lines normally do, with small waves from his weight and small waves from the air. He bent his knees and took slow steps, looking at the far anchor. The breeze pushed from his right side. He paused, let the motion settle, and kept moving. People watching held their breath without meaning to. A visitor with a camera later said it was quiet, except for wind and the small sound of the webbing. Halfway across, a stronger gust hit from the same direction. The line dipped and rolled a few inches. Cole lowered into a crouch to absorb the motion. He stood up again, took a step, and the line rolled a little more. A person watching from the overlook said Cole wobbled once, then twice, and the line moved out from under his foot. Cole tried to sit down on the line, but missed catching it and fell into open space. Without a safety leash, there was nothing to stop the fall. The crew at each anchor could only watch him fall past the cliff into open air. Park rangers were already in the area and called for more support. The overlook was cleared while a rescue team set up below. A helicopter was requested but canceled as ground teams moved into position. The response changed from rescue to recovery. Rangers took statements from the people who set up the line, nearby hikers, and the 2 closest tourists at the railing. The crew gave rangers the handheld wind readings and photos of the anchors before taking down the equipment. A ranger measured anchor positions, line length, and webbing type. The site was marked and photographed. By late afternoon, recovery teams reached the location below the cliff. The coroner documented the scene, and the body was transported out by ground crews. The park reopened the overlook with a ranger posted to answer questions and prevent copycat attempts. A week later, family and friends held a short memorial at the trailhead. They read from Cole's training notebook and placed webbing and a flower near the start point. A small service was held in Reno 2 days later. The National Park Service reviewed the event as an accidental fall. Rangers updated visitor information to stress the risks of walking high lines without safety ropes. The county coroner listed the cause of death as blunt force trauma. Among local slackliners, the incident became a rule. Wind plus height increases risk without a safety leash. Crews added one more check to their routine. If wind stayed above single digits, they attached safety lines or packed up. It was August 23, 2017, when 22-year-old Wilder Prescott's overconfidence would prove deadly on a downtown Portland rooftop. Working as a freelance graphic designer, Wilder had spent 3 years practicing parkour around the city's warehouse district. His athletic build and fearless attitude made him popular among urban explorers, but his need to push boundaries would become his downfall. The evening started when Wilder met his roommate and another friend on adjacent apartment building rooftops. His roommate, working in food service, had been challenging Wilder to dangerous stunts for their social media accounts. The third member worked retail and served as their camera operator, eager to capture viral moments. The gap between buildings appeared manageable at 8 feet across, well within Wilder's proven jumping ability. Wilder didn't realize he was being misled by his friend's confidence, believing the jump was far safer than it actually was, and what he didn't know was that their confidence was part of a running prank, an ongoing joke where they exaggerated the safety of stunts to push him into attempts he otherwise might refuse. He'd completed similar distances before, though never at such a dangerous height. 4 stories above concrete pavement left no room for error. But Wilder's competitive nature wouldn't let him back down. Earlier that evening, Wilder had consumed a couple of beers with dinner. While not enough to significantly impair judgment, the alcohol provided false confidence to override natural caution. Building engineers later confirmed the gravel layer was designed for drainage, not traction, a detail that made his run-up more hazardous than anyone realized. The rooftop's surface was covered in loose pea gravel, creating a treacherous footing none of them considered. As darkness settled, Wilder positioned himself for the jump. He measured out a 15-foot running start, believing the distance would provide adequate momentum to clear the gap safely. His friends positioned themselves on the target building, camera ready to document another successful stunt. The fatal sequence began when Wilder started his approach run. Building speed across the gravel surface, he focused on the parapet wall where he would launch into the void. But as he planted his takeoff foot, disaster struck when shifting loose stones beneath his boot caused instability. The unstable surface dropped his launch angle significantly lower than intended. Instead of the clean, horizontal trajectory needed, Wilder followed a steep downward arc that brought him well short of the target physics had taken control, with no correcting his path mid-flight. His fingertips barely grazed the opposite building's edge before his chest collided violently with the brick facade at the third-floor level. The impact shattered multiple ribs and caused severe internal injuries. But his nightmare was just beginning. The collision sent him rebounding backward into the narrow alley below. During his 40-foot fall, Wilder struck a fire escape railing with devastating force. The impact spun his body around, rotating him head down for the final descent phase. This rotation proved to be the determining factor in his fate. When Wilder struck the concrete alley surface, the head-first impact caused catastrophic skull and spine injuries. The force caused a basilar skull fracture and severe cervical spine dislocation, injuries that are instantly fatal upon impact. No human could survive such trauma. Witnesses immediately called emergency services, but paramedics could only confirm what was apparent. Officers documented the scene and initially classified it as a fatal fall during an unauthorized rooftop stunt. However, investigators later learned that the stunt had been encouraged through an ongoing prank between the friends, where they routinely exaggerated the safety of challenges to push Wilder into attempts he otherwise might refuse. Building management responded by installing higher barriers around rooftop access points. Wilder's roommate faced legal consequences, receiving community service and mandatory counseling for his role in the prank's escalation. The case became a sobering reminder that even seemingly harmless jokes can combine with height, misjudgment, and peer pressure to produce fatal outcomes. It was June 30th, 2018, in Key West, Florida. The harbor lights flickered across the dark water, casting unsteady reflections between boats swaying in the humid night air. By midnight, the mood shifted from celebration to recklessness, and what began as a harmless dare would unravel into something irreversible. Todd Jenkins, 32, had worked for years as a yacht mechanic in Monroe County. His reputation on the docks was built on speed and strength. He could strip and repair an engine faster than most, and he was known for pushing limits off the clock as well. Nights usually ended in bars, where he picked fights or pulled stunts to prove himself tougher than anyone else. Friends saw it as bravado covering frustration. Todd drank heavily, but he also craved an audience, especially when younger co-workers began mocking him as past his prime. Risk, for him, was never separate from pride. Though not tied to any sponsors or organizations, his life revolved around Key West's marina culture. Mechanics, captains, and crew all shared the same bars and boats, their reputations carried by word of mouth. Todd lived for attention in that small circle. The environment itself fed his impulses. Boats with slick decks, jagged cleats, and heavy gear made for both a workplace and a playground when alcohol blurred judgment. He had walked dock railings before, balancing while friends cheered, but never under the glow of a party boat filled with strangers. That night's charter began like any other. The group drank rum while a stereo blasted classic rock. Todd had already downed several cups before he tied a thick rope between the boat's bow railing and a wooden piling at the dock. The makeshift bridge sagged with tension, but he insisted he would cross it like a pirate, his shirt off, sweat shining under floodlights. Passengers laughed nervously. Some cheered him on, while others warned the rope was slick and unstable. The captain objected but didn't intervene, distracted by keeping the boat steady against the dock and the tide. Todd stepped onto the rope barefoot. His arms stretched wide for balance, body swaying with the pull of the line. Passengers crowded the bow, cell phones up, recording. The rope bounced with every step. He grinned, soaking in the attention, and staggered forward as if performing. Then his foot slipped against the wet line. He lurched sideways, arms flailing. Witnesses recalled him hitting the metal railing on his way down with a sharp thud before splashing into the black water below. At first, the crowd thought it was another stunt. Then blood spread quickly on the surface. He had slashed his wrist against a jagged cleat welded to the hull near the bow. In the floodlights, the water churned red. Todd thrashed, striking out with his good arm, but his movements weakened almost immediately. His head dipped under once, then again, longer each time. The music stopped, replaced by screams. Several passengers threw life rings, but the current pulled him just out of reach. The captain alerted the authorities. One man jumped in but struggled in the turbulence and was hauled back aboard. Within less than a minute, Todd's arms stopped moving. His body rolled once with the tide before disappearing under the boat. By the time the Coast Guard arrived, divers were needed to retrieve him. His body was found near the piling, limp and pale, wrist torn open, blood diluted into the harbor. The Coast Guard's report later cited alcohol, unsafe conditions, and disregard for warnings. No charges were filed against the crew or captain. The case was marked closed within days. Todd's funeral was held a week later at a small church in Key West. The pews filled mostly with dock workers, mechanics, and longtime locals. A handful of co-workers shared short memories of his skill in the shop, but few spoke of the night itself. For most, it was less a shock than a grim confirmation of where his habits had led. It was October 2nd, 2016, in Imperial County, California. A large square net hung 200 feet above a dry lake bed from 4 mobile cranes. A small jump plane circled overhead while the ground crew watched wind flags. Tyler Nash was a 29-year-old rigging technician from San Diego with over 800 jumps. He wanted to attempt a net-only jump with no parachute, falling directly into the catching system below. Nash had trained for months and practiced with smoke canisters to judge wind drift. He worked on small body movements like shoulder rolls, foot, and head angle. He trusted his ability to judge depth and distance, and relied on the way the desert horizon stayed steady when his flight path was correct. The setup on the lake bed was simple and easy to spot from the air. A 100 by 100 foot net was suspended about 200 feet above the ground from 4 mobile cranes, with a bright X marking the center. Below it, the impact zone was cleared of vehicles and equipment, and a medical unit staged nearby. The county had issued permits for the demonstration. The FAA was notified, and the sheriff's office posted a unit on the access road. At dawn, the flags barely moved. By mid-morning, the wind had increased to around 10 to 12 miles per hour and came a few degrees off the predicted direction. The flight path Nash planned assumed light wind from behind, but the crosswind grew stronger, pushing the flight line to the south. Nash rode up in the jump plane with a spotter and a cameraman. He wore an oxygen mask for the climb and a GPS logger. On the ground, spotters used wind flags and a handheld anemometer. The plan called for a stable belly-down fall to build speed, then a roll to head down in the last few thousand feet to adjust the line. While he was still in the plane, radio traffic stayed calm as the crew chief called out wind readings and suggested a wave off and reset if the crosswind drift looked wrong. Nash pulled off the mask seconds before exit. Nash exited the plane cleanly and held a steady position. As he fell, the crosswind pulled his flight path a few feet off center. He rolled slightly to correct his position, then rolled back. Spotters tracked his position against the center mark for the log. The net filled more of the camera frame as he got closer. In the final seconds, he came in high and moving fast. A spotter standing at the base of a mobile crane said Nash was slightly off target before he disappeared from view. He hit the edge of the net webbing, bounced outside the square, and fell through the gap beyond the frame. The impact zone team ran toward him. The pilot climbed and held clear as briefed. The scene remained controlled as emergency responders reached Nash. The sheriff's unit secured the area while medical personnel worked. The crew secured and then lowered the net for safety and documentation and began packing equipment. Deputies took statements from the pilot, the crew chief, and the two closest observers, including the spotter who had called out the drift measurements. Later, the GPS data showed his path veered a few degrees in the last 1,000 feet, matching what the wind flags indicated. Nash's funeral was held a week later at a small church in San Diego. Friends from the jumping community brought his helmet and logbook to the service. County officials reviewed the setup with an independent engineer. The engineer found the rig met its stated load specs, but left little margin if a jumper arrived off-center. The FAA and the sheriff's office listed the death as accidental, with wind drift as a contributing factor. The county coroner ruled the cause of death blunt force trauma. In the local jumping community, the incident served as a warning that being slightly off target can be dangerous when the landing area is small and wind conditions change. It was March 22nd, 2018, in a crowded residential compound in Lagos, Nigeria. On that day, a series of thoughtless prank calls had already been routed through the local emergency hotline, overwhelming the dispatchers and delaying response times. No one anticipated that one of these calls would indirectly cost a life in the very compound where chaos had been sown. Amaka Ease, 34, was a skilled seamstress who ran a small, home-based tailoring business. She lived with 3 children and her elderly aunt, who suffered from mobility and swallowing difficulties. Amaka had a meticulous nature, both in her work and her household, and was deeply protective of her family. She occasionally joked with neighbors and friends, but had a history of underestimating minor risks, often believing her presence could manage any sudden danger at home. Her days were long, alternating between sewing, errands, and caring for her household, and she occasionally recorded short instructional videos for local tailoring networks, seeking modest sponsorship from a regional fabric supplier. Her living environment was cramped and chaotic, narrow hallways, stacked furniture, and limited exits. Emergency services had always been slow in this part of Lagos, but Amaka relied on knowing the fastest routes to the street and kept basic first aid supplies close. She sometimes dismissed minor safety protocols, such as ensuring a second adult was present when cooking or lifting heavy objects, assuming she could handle sudden emergencies. The combination of her proactive nature and overconfidence in personal vigilance made her vulnerable in situations that demanded outside help. That afternoon, Amaka's aunt began to choke on a small piece of food. Amaka immediately began back blows while shouting for assistance. A neighbor tried both the 767 and 112 emergency lines, but one rang endlessly and the other returned a network error. Amaka continued trying to clear the airway while moving furniture to make space for intervention. Nearby, a local courier on a delivery route noticed the commotion. He sprinted to the junction to flag down passing police and patrol cars, but every unit was tied up responding to prank calls or minor false alarms. He saw Amaka's frantic movements, her face pale and strained, hands repeatedly slapping the aunt's back, while neighbors banged on doors and yelled for immediate help. Chaos and helplessness were evident. Time slowed, yet no professional assistance arrived. By the time an ambulance arrived nearly 30 minutes later, the aunt had already lost consciousness. Paramedics administered resuscitation, performing CPR and oxygen therapy, but the prolonged delay had caused irreversible hypoxia. Investigators later reviewed the dispatcher's logs, noting dozens of prank calls in the preceding 48 hours, many originating from the same youth group. Investigators traced many of those prank calls to a group of secondary school students using shared SIM cards at a local youth center. The cumulative effect of these calls had shifted priority and contributed to the fatal delay. The incident left neighbors shaken. Community meetings quickly turned to anger and reflection, recognizing how a harmless prank escalated into tragedy. The youth center responsible for several offenders implemented mandatory first aid and public safety workshops for the pranksters, ensuring they understood the real-world consequences of their actions. Telecom authorities also instituted stricter call screening and heavier penalties for serial prank callers. It was August 3rd, 2018, when 27-year-old Tamsin Alcott's love for nocturnal adventures would lead to a fatal encounter with darkness at a floodlit platform in Idaho. Tamsin worked as a night shift supervisor at a regional logistics warehouse, coordinating freight operations during quiet hours when most people slept. Her natural affinity for nighttime activities had shaped both her career and personal interests. She thrived in darkness, finding peace in the stillness that others found unsettling. Unlike most thrill seekers who preferred daylight adventures, Tamsin specifically sought out the rare nighttime bungee jumping experience. Only a handful of operators offered jumps after dark, making it an exclusive activity among extreme sports enthusiasts. She had been planning this particular jump for months. She arrived at the narrow canyon platform with her boyfriend, Derek, who harbored serious reservations about the nighttime conditions. The facility had invested heavily in powerful floodlights that illuminated the jumping platform, creating a dramatic contrast between the bright staging area and the pitch-black void beyond. The platform was positioned over a particularly narrow section of canyon, with rocky walls rising steeply on both sides. The canyon measured roughly 130 feet across, still narrow for bungee operations, but within local regulatory limits. During daylight hours, jumpers could easily maintain spatial awareness. At night, however, the canyon became an endless black abyss that played dangerous tricks on the human mind. The facility's safety briefing included specific warnings about darkness-induced disorientation, a phenomenon that affected even experienced jumpers when visual reference points were eliminated. Staff members emphasized the importance of trusting the equipment rather than relying on visual cues. Tamsin appeared confident as she was fitted with a full-body harness and ankle cuffs. The staff provided her with a protective helmet and explained that occasional wind gusts funneled through the narrow canyon, creating brief lateral forces during descent. As Tamsin stepped to the edge, the powerful floodlights created a stark boundary between known and unknown. Beyond the illuminated circle, the canyon walls disappeared into complete darkness, creating a disorienting visual effect that made the drop appear infinitely deep. The jump began smoothly, with Tamsin executing a clean step-off with textbook form. However, the complete absence of visual reference points immediately triggered severe vertigo, a reaction that staff later explained was common when jumpers lost all spatial anchors in darkness. In her disoriented state, Tamsin began making uncontrolled movements, desperately trying to find spatial orientation in the featureless darkness. These movements induced rotational forces that caused both her body and the bungee cord to begin spinning during descent. As the cord approached maximum extension, a brief wind gust funneled through the narrow canyon, creating additional lateral displacement amplified by her spinning motion. The combination pushed her trajectory toward the rocky canyon wall. Her right shoulder and helmeted head clipped the canyon wall just before full elongation, when lateral drift and rotation were still in motion. While her helmet absorbed much of the direct impact, significant force was still transmitted to her cervical spine and upper torso, causing immediate trauma. The rebound phase, affected by cord twist and the off-center downward path, created a lateral pendulum arc that carried her back toward the rock face. Tamsin struck the rocky surfaces 2 additional times, each impact causing further trauma despite the protective helmet. Jump staff immediately recognized the emergency and initiated controlled retrieval procedures. But Tamsin had already lost consciousness from the repeated impacts. She was completely unresponsive when brought back to the platform. She was transported to the nearest hospital, but continued resuscitation efforts failed. She died from blunt force trauma, including cervical spine injury and severe internal bleeding. The operator voluntarily suspended all nighttime operations pending a comprehensive safety review, Derek became an advocate for daylight-only policies at narrow canyon locations, working with local operators and regional outdoor safety groups to promote stricter nighttime guidelines. It was July 9, 2016, on the outskirts of Reno, Nevada. The Lemon Valley track baked under the desert heat. Spectators shaded their eyes with gloved hands, waiting for the freestyle portion of the meet to begin. The wind carried the faint hum of engines idling, mixed with the smell of oil and scorched dirt. Tyler Brennan, 24, was known around the local motocross circuit as a mechanic who could outride half the professionals he tuned for. He worked weekdays in a small garage south of Sparks, saving money to build his own bike, a modified 250 cubic centimeter frame reinforced for stunts. Friends said his obsession wasn't fame, but control. He'd been rebuilding engines since high school, chasing the idea of a machine that could move exactly as he imagined. Sponsors never came calling, but he didn't mind. His motivation came from proving he could hang with riders who had backing and custom parts he could only dream of affording. Motocross in the desert demanded precision. Tracks like Lemon Valley had hard-packed soil that punished overcorrection. Landing angles were everything. Even a few degrees off could send the rear tire bucking. Tyler's custom bike was heavier than stock, its altered suspension giving him extra lift, but making rotation harder to time. The backflip, a showy but high-risk move, was something he practiced on foam pits and dunes. But dirt jumps were different. The bike's weight could pull forward mid-air if the speed was misjudged. That afternoon, the event's organizers were pushing to finish before temperatures climbed further. Conditions were still within competition limits, though wind readings hovered near the cutoff. Tyler lined up his run anyway. He'd landed the same backflip only twice before, once during an exhibition in Carson City and once on a private practice jump. The jump was about 70 feet from ramp to landing. On his first 2 warm-up passes, he came up short, adjusting throttle and approach angle. The third time, he gunned it harder, engine screaming as he launched. His rotation was too aggressive from the start. At the apex, the bike was nearly vertical, rear tire pointing skyward. Spectators' footage showed the instant imbalance. Too much torque, not enough clearance. The rear wheel struck the ground first, compressing violently. The impact pitched him forward over the handlebars, his helmeted head snapping back as he hit the dirt chest first. The sound was dull, mechanical, followed by the revving of the still-running engine. The motorcycle bounced once, then toppled onto him, the rear tire spinning in the air. Officials and medics sprinted across the track. When they rolled the bike off, Tyler wasn't breathing. His pulse never returned despite repeated compressions. It was later determined the break, an atlantoaxial dislocation at the upper cervical spine, had been instant. Spectators were ushered back while paramedics draped a tarp over the scene. The announcer's voice faltered before the speakers went silent. By sunset, the track was empty except for tire ruts and the faint oil stain where his bike had come to rest. When the coroner's report came out, the term instantaneous became its quiet reassurance. No charges were filed, no equipment blamed. His closest friend sold his bike soon after and began showing up only with a pickup, helping others fix theirs while the jumps stayed untouched longer than usual. It was August 26, 2017, on a narrow, winding road just outside Tagaytay, Philippines. The evening air was thick and humid, carrying the faint scent of nearby pine and smoke from distant fires. That night, a series of thoughtless stunts and prank ideas had already circulated among local teens and amateur filmmakers, setting the stage for a tragedy they should have anticipated. Renz Agapito, 25, worked as a part-time caretaker at a small resort overlooking the ridge and had recently joined a local film collective specializing in prank videos for social media. He had a playful personality, often volunteering for the riskiest roles in their sketches. He sometimes carried a sponsorship from a regional snack brand that encouraged creative content, and his Facebook page had modest but growing engagement. The roads near the resort were steep, narrow, and poorly lit, with minimal shoulders, no guardrails, and frequent hairpin turns, terrain that required careful attention from drivers and anyone near the edge. Locals often warned newcomers about sudden drop-offs and blind corners, but Renz ignored the danger. chasing the viral reaction he hoped would hit online. The technical demands of the setup were simple on paper. Renz would hide behind a tree near the roadside, wearing a white sheet, then jump out as a vehicle approached. Two friends would film from a parked motorcycle several meters back. The plan relied entirely on precise timing, Renz's ability to retreat quickly, and the expectation that passing drivers would react predictably. That night, the group began filming around 11:40 p.m. Traffic was light, but the incline increased vehicle speed unpredictably. Renz positioned himself behind a tree, sheet draped loosely over his shoulders. The friends filmed, the engine of a passing motorcycle humming softly. Renz ignored the muffled sounds of cars approaching from the distance, assuming he could step aside quickly if needed. A gray SUV came around the bend too fast. Its headlights cut sharply across the road, illuminating Renz for just a fraction of a second. He stepped out, arms raised under the sheet. The driver swerved instinctively, tires scraping the narrow shoulder before overcorrecting. The SUV skidded sideways, striking Renz and throwing him several meters before hitting a concrete barrier. Nearby stall workers heard the metallic crash and rushed toward the sound. Renz was found partially covered by the torn sheet, motionless. His friends ran to him as residents came out from nearby houses. Responders and police from the local precinct arrived minutes later after one of the residents' calls. They found multiple fractures, internal bleeding, and blunt force trauma consistent with high-speed impact. The SUV driver, a woman in her 40s, sustained minor cuts and shock, but survived. Investigators later reviewed the friends' phone footage and skid marks to confirm that the prank had directly triggered the crash. The footage showed Renz stepping out just before impact, leaving the driver no time to react. Authorities ruled the case an accident caused by reckless imprudence resulting in homicide. A charge filed against the two surviving members of the film group. They faced both criminal and civil proceedings for contributory negligence. Renz's family held a private funeral in Cavite, attended mostly by relatives and neighbors. It was September 3rd, 2017, when 41-year-old Chad Ellington, a construction foreman from Los Angeles, embarked on what would become his final desert camping adventure to Anza Borrego Desert State Park. Standing 6 feet 2 inches, with a muscular build earned through years of demanding manual labor, Chad was known for his physical strength and practical problem-solving abilities that served him well on construction sites. His personality was notably stubborn and self-reliant, traits that made him an effective foreman, but also led him to dismiss weather warnings as overly cautious, bureaucratic nonsense. Chad had been an experienced desert camper for over a decade, visiting Anza Borrego quarterly to escape the stress and noise of city life while photographing the region's spectacular desert wildflowers. Chad chose to camp in Coyote Canyon during his annual solo camping trip, seeking solitude and the perfect shots of late-season blooms. Weather services had issued flash flood warnings for the entire region due to tropical storm remnants moving northward from Baja California, but Chad's stubborn nature led him to ignore these alerts completely. His campsite was located in what appeared to be a perfectly flat, sandy area, but was actually part of an active alluvial fan system with braided drainage patterns typical of desert washes. Chad set up his tent 150 yards from the main wash channel, failing to recognize the subtle geological signs that indicated this area regularly channeled floodwater during storms. Having camped in similar desert washes before during dry conditions, Chad's past experiences reinforced his belief that September storms were typically brief and localized events that posed no real threat to experienced campers like himself. Late night, intense thunderstorms in the distant Laguna Mountains began dumping 3.2 inches of rain in just 90 minutes over the watershed that fed directly into Coyote Canyon. Chad was inside his tent organizing camera gear when he heard what sounded like distant wind, completely unaware that the sound was actually rushing water and debris racing toward his location. Within minutes, an 8-foot wall of chocolate brown water mixed with boulders and uprooted desert vegetation came surging down the wash at 30 miles per hour. The flash flood struck Chad's campsite with tremendous hydraulic force, instantly flattening his tent and dragging him into the violent torrent before he could react. Chad was swept hundreds of yards rapidly, his body tumbling violently among car-sized boulders and massive desert ironwood logs. The debris-laden water caused a catastrophic blunt force trauma, fracturing his skull, breaking multiple ribs, and crushing his left shoulder as he was repeatedly slammed against rocks. His tent and sleeping bag wrapped around his torso like a straitjacket, preventing him from swimming even during brief moments when he surfaced. Chad aspirated massive amounts of muddy water filled with sand, gravel, and organic debris, completely blocking his airways and preventing any chance of breathing. The relentless flood carried Chad another 1,200 yards through a narrow canyon section where he was repeatedly battered against rock walls. Chad drowned minutes later, his battered body finally lodging against a concrete debris basin where the wash entered flatter terrain. Park rangers discovered Chad's completely obliterated campsite the next morning during post-storm damage assessment of the canyon system. His body was found 1.8 miles downstream by search and rescue teams using all-terrain vehicles to survey the devastated wash. The medical examiner determined death by drowning with massive blunt force trauma from debris impact. Investigation revealed the flash flood had peaked at 12 feet deep and moved over 8,000 tons of sediment and debris through the canyon. Following Chad's tragic death, authorities implemented better warning systems and made it mandatory to close all desert washes when flash flood watches are issued. It was April 16, 2018, near Page, Arizona. A plywood takeoff ramp faced a narrow desert cut in the ground, made of hard clay and sand. Ryan Cole was 35 years old and worked as a mechanic. He built bikes in his garage and rode at local stunt nights. He measured ramps with a tape and level, marked run-ups with chalk, and checked engine settings twice before shows. He told friends this one was a short gap for the hometown crowd. His partner had warned him about the wind that morning. The cut in the ground was roughly 12 feet deep and about 30 to 35 feet across. The takeoff ramp stood about 4 feet high, built with lumber and covered with plywood. Across the gap, a landing pile of packed dirt rose a few feet above the far bank. A friend set up a camera on the landing side. By late morning, gusts pushed dust across the run-up. A handheld meter showed about 10 miles per hour with higher crosswind gusts. Ryan walked the run-up and wiped the ramp face with a towel, but fine dust and grit remained. He marked his steps with chalk, then rolled the bike back to a mark that gave him about 120 feet of run-up. He did 2 speed checks, rolling on and off the gas to feel the pull. The engine sounded clean on the straight, but coughed once when he revved at the bottom of the ramp. He pointed at the engine part, made a quick mixture change, and took one more pass. Sirens sounded from the highway, a mile away. The friend on the pile called that the camera was ready. Ryan went around, lined up, and opened the gas. The bike went straight on the hard ground. At the bottom of the ramp, he gave a final gas boost. The motor hesitated. The front wheel dipped as speed fell short. He reached the edge. The bike hesitated again, and the jump went flat. A security guard from a nearby business said later it sounded wrong at takeoff, like it lost breath. The front wheel hit the far edge of the cut. The bike tipped forward and fell into the cut. A dust cloud rose from the bottom. The friend on the pile ran to the edge and called 911, giving mile markers and a nearby crossroad. The guard moved cars back and kept people behind the cones. A deputy arrived first, followed by a fire unit and EMS. Crews went down into the cut with a backboard and secured the scene. The deputy noted wind conditions, ramp location, and distances with a laser measure. Investigators photographed the ramp face, chalk marks, and tire tracks. They measured the gap at 33 feet from edge to edge and recorded the run-up length and ramp height. The friend provided the camera card. The guard gave his statement. The deputy spoke with Ryan's partner, who confirmed the earlier warning about wind. After EMS confirmed fatal injuries, the coroner was notified. By early afternoon, the scene was cleared. The coroner documented the location and arranged transport. The deputy tagged the ramp and the bike as evidence and then released the scene to the property owner. A teardown of the motorcycle at Ryan's garage found a lean condition at throttle tip-in, matching the bog witnesses heard at the ramp, but the cause of death was listed by the coroner as blunt force trauma. The funeral drew riders from 3 towns. His partner spoke briefly about patience and leaving projects unfinished. Deputies cited members of the crew for trespass and unsafe assembly on private land. The county later issued guidance on event permits and placed barriers to block access to that cut for future stunts. Within the local riding scene, the video became a training note rather than a clip to share. Riders repeated 3 points the next week. Test throttle response underload. Do not launch with dust on the face. And call it off if wind hits double digits with gusts. It was June 18, 2017, when 35-year-old Caspian Reed's expertise in structural engineering would become tragically ironic at a historic railway trestle in West Virginia. Caspian worked as a civil engineer specializing in structural integrity assessments and bridge renovations. Investigation records would later show his reputation for identifying potential failure points in aging infrastructure. Personal files revealed an obsession with historic bridges. The railway trestle was a 1920s steel and timber structure converted from freight service to recreational bungee jumping. Digital evidence showed Caspian had researched this bridge for months, drawn to its riveted steel beams and timber supports. He arrived with his wife, Jennifer, and their 2 young children, planning a family outing combining his professional interests with an adrenaline-pumping experience. Recent torrential rainfall had swollen the river significantly. Jump operators conducted standard visual inspections, noting minor surface scour around visible bridge foundations. The bridge's annual engineering inspection, conducted 8 months earlier, did not include an underwater assessment of the pier foundations. Their assessment indicated acceptable safety parameters based on what could be observed above the waterline. What nobody could detect was that flooding had severely undermined a critical bridge pier's concrete footings beneath the murky river. The underwater scour had washed away supporting material far below the waterline, leaving the foundation catastrophically compromised and invisible to surface inspections. The jump proceeded normally through Caspian's descent and bungee extension. Unknown to anyone present, the undermined pier was already at the point of imminent collapse as Caspian was being retrieved. The compromised foundation finally gave way under the pier's own weight. The timing was purely coincidental. The central span supported by the failed pier collapsed as steel beams twisted and timber supports splintered. Only the section above the compromised pier failed, leaving approach spans intact. Caspian was struck by falling steel beams and concrete debris, unable to escape while attached to the bungee cord. Emergency responders worked for hours with heavy equipment to reach him through the wreckage. Caspian was pronounced dead at the scene. The coroner confirmed blunt force trauma from collapsing structural debris as the cause of death. The investigation revealed how underwater scour had progressed beyond what surface inspections could detect. The tragedy led to new West Virginia state regulations requiring underwater foundation inspections for converted recreational infrastructure. The bridge site was permanently closed and demolished. It was July 28, 2015, when 45-year-old Eli Patterson, an insurance adjuster from Pasadena, embarked on what would become his final camping trip to Angeles National Forest. Standing 5 feet 10 inches with an average build typical of someone who spent most days behind a desk, Eli was known for his analytical mind and methodical approach to problem solving that served him well in his demanding career. His personality was naturally cautious and rule-following, traits that made him excellent at his job evaluating insurance claims. However, Eli sometimes became paralyzed by overthinking during crisis situations, a characteristic that would prove fatal in the wilderness. As a weekend warrior, he enjoyed solo camping as essential stress relief from his high-pressure work environment. After a particularly stressful period handling wildfire insurance claims, Eli desperately needed to escape the summer heat and constant city noise. He chose a remote campsite in Angeles National Forest, located 2.8 miles from the nearest road access and connected only by a narrow hiking trail winding through dense chaparral vegetation. Fire danger was rated as extreme throughout the region due to severe drought conditions. But Eli believed his campsite near a small creek would provide adequate protection from any potential fire threat. Following his standard safety protocol for solo trips, Eli informed his brother of his exact location and planned return date before departing. He set up camp late in the afternoon on Saturday, noting the bone-dry conditions. but feeling secure due to the nearby water source and cleared area surrounding his tent. The following day, an illegal campfire 4 miles away escaped containment and rapidly spread through drought-stressed vegetation. Driven by powerful Santa Ana winds reaching 35 miles per hour, the fire advanced at 3 miles per hour through the dense chaparral, heading directly toward Eli's remote location. Eli first noticed smoke in the early afternoon, but initially dismissed it as a distant, controlled burn he had heard mentioned on park radio broadcasts. As time passed, the smoke thickened considerably, and he could see orange flames glowing through the trees, prompting him to pack his gear quickly. He began hiking toward the trailhead, but the narrow trail soon became completely choked with thick smoke, reducing visibility to less than 10 feet. His analytical mind, usually a valuable asset, now worked against him as he second-guessed every decision. The fire reached Eli's abandoned campsite shortly after he departed, with flames towering 40 feet high and temperatures exceeding 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit. Disoriented in the dense smoke, Eli made a fatal wrong turn, heading deeper into the forest instead of toward safety. As the afternoon progressed, he found himself surrounded by advancing flames on 3 sides. With the fire moving faster than he could navigate through the rugged terrain, Eli sought shelter behind a large boulder, but radiant heat from the approaching inferno caused severe burns to his exposed skin. Superheated air and toxic smoke inflicted devastating respiratory burns, while carbon monoxide poisoning clouded his judgment. He lost consciousness as the fire swept directly over his location. Eli died from smoke inhalation and severe thermal injuries as the flames engulfed the area. Firefighters discovered Eli's remains 2 days later during post-fire damage assessment operations. His body was found 0.6 miles from the correct trail, confirming he had become lost in the smoke and panic. The medical examiner determined death by smoke inhalation, with severe thermal burns covering 60% of his body. Eli's tragic passing catalyzed improvements to evacuation procedures and emergency communication systems in remote forest areas. It was July 12, 2015, when 18-year-old Hadley Rivers' desire to fit in would cost her everything at a suburban Phoenix pool party. Fresh out of high school and working part-time at a pet store, Hadley was known for her trusting nature and eagerness to make friends before starting college. Her mild asthma hadn't bothered her in years, so she didn't bring her inhaler to what seemed like an innocent gathering. The party was hosted by classmates she barely knew, but Hadley was desperate to break into the popular crowd. The host's older brother, a college student studying chemistry, convinced the group to film what he called a harmless pool prank. Claiming the water would change colors around swimmers, Hadley believed him, unaware the mixture he prepared was dangerously unstable. Working part-time at a grocery store, he boasted about his chemistry skills and assured everyone the effect would look spectacular on camera. What the group didn't realize was that their amateur chemist was mixing industrial cleaning agents with pool chlorine, creating a dangerous combination he had never tested. The chemicals sat in unmarked containers near the pool deck with minimal safety information. Hadley had been swimming in the shallow end when the fatal experiment began. The summer heat was intense with little wind to disperse gases. The pool's design created a natural basin where heavier-than-air chemicals could settle around the water's surface. The older brother poured granular calcium hypochlorite into the water near the steps where Hadley was relaxing. Within minutes, he poured in a common muriatic acid used for pool pH adjustment, unaware that mixing it directly with calcium hypochlorite releases chlorine gas almost instantly. The reaction was immediate and deadly, producing a yellow-green cloud of chlorine gas rising from the water. Because chlorine is heavier than air, it accumulated at the waterline, creating an invisible cloud no higher than a few feet, exactly where Hadley was breathing, and the toxic gas settled around the pool area where Hadley remained. She began coughing violently as chlorine gas attacked her respiratory system, her eyes turning red from chemical irritation. Her dormant asthma suddenly became life-threatening as her airways began constricting. Hadley attempted to exit via the steps, but the gas cloud lingered, forcing her to continue breathing toxic fumes. Her skin showed visible irritation while her breathing became increasingly labored. Other guests finally realized something was wrong when Hadley's speech became broken and desperate. The group moved Hadley to an open area and flushed her eyes, but her condition worsened rapidly as severe bronchospasm set in. Emergency technicians arrived within minutes, providing oxygen and bronchodilators, yet her breathing continued to deteriorate. Foamy sputum developed during transport, a sign of acute lung injury. At the hospital, imaging confirmed diffuse pulmonary edema from chlorine inhalation. Despite high-flow oxygen and mechanical ventilation, she progressed to acute respiratory distress syndrome with refractory hypoxemia. Hadley was pronounced dead in the early morning hours, her life cut short by a preventable chemical accident disguised as a harmless prank. Investigators classified the incident as a fatal chemical exposure during unauthorized experimentation, later confirming the color-changing pool prank had been carried out with no understanding of the risks. The homeowner received citations, and the brother was ordered to complete hazardous materials safety training. Hadley's family created safety programs in her memory, and the pool was permanently closed. January 20th, 2018, in Dallas, Texas. The air inside the Lone Star Elite Gym was dry and heavy with the smell of rubber mats and sweat. The team's final Saturday practice before Nationals was supposed to be brief, just a timing review. But by night's end, the building would fall silent in a way it never had before. Madison Clark, 16, was one of the youngest flyers on the Lone Star Elite cheer squad. She'd earned her place early, moving up from junior level after coaches noticed her balance and fearlessness. At 5 feet 2 inches and barely over 100 pounds, she was light but strong, known for committing to new stunts before others dared to try. Off the mat, she was meticulous. Color-coded notebooks, foam rollers lined by height, chalk marks for spacing. The team trained 6 days a week under the Texas Cheer Athletics Circuit, with sponsorships from small athletic brands that expected podium finishes. Madison wanted a college cheer scholarship and knew high-difficulty routines got attention. The gym's spring floor was designed to absorb shock, but still felt firm under landings. Flyers were expected to rely entirely on their base's grip and timing. One hesitation could collapse a formation. Madison had learned to trust that system, repetition as safety, precision as confidence. That evening, the team gathered for a closed practice. A few members were out sick, including 2 base lifters from Madison's primary stunt group. The coach decided to run a timing-only drill for the new pyramid variation that would headline their Nationals routine. Madison's release twist from the top would be the visual peak, a 540-degree spin before regrasp. The stunt was designed for full-height execution later in the season, but during spacing tests, it reached roughly 12 feet off the floor. The coach allowed it, with spotters moved closer, but still 2 steps back for visibility. The session stretched past 9 p.m. The team had already repeated the sequence 7 times. Fatigue was obvious, shoulders slumped, timing slightly delayed on the catches. Madison brushed chalk dust from her hands and adjusted her wrist wraps. She hesitated once, glancing at her coach, who gave a nod to continue. The song cue started again. She climbed the base formation, feet finding shoulders, hands gripping wrists. On count 5, she rose to full height, arms locked. On 6, she initiated the twist. Video analysis later showed what happened next. As she began the rotation, her left foot caught the shoulder of the mid-base, disrupting her spin axis. The contact forced her body sideways, throwing off the planned rotation. Witnesses said her torso turned at an unnatural angle mid-air, one arm flailing as she tried to correct. Her head snapped downward, and instead of descending flat, she fell diagonally from nearly 14 feet. The bases reached up too late. Madison struck the mat on her right temple, the sound sharp and hollow in the open gym. She didn't move. Teammates froze, then screamed. One ran to the front desk to call 911 while another held her hand, noticing the brief tremor in her fingers that faded within seconds. The coach checked her pulse, but found it erratic. Paramedics arrived within 4 minutes and provided assisted ventilation while stabilizing her cervical spine. She was taken to Baylor University Medical Center, where CT scans revealed a severe subdural hematoma with brainstem compression. She never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead just after midnight. The gym shut down for a week, Investigators found no equipment failure and confirmed that mats met regulation depth. The report cited loss of rotational control during elevated stunt release as the cause. In later reviews, coaches admitted fatigue and reduced base staffing may have increased risk. In the weeks that followed, the gym stayed unnervingly quiet. Music was played at half volume, and the speaker above Madison's side of the floor was kept unplugged. Her uniform hung untouched in a locker marked with her initials. When competition season resumed, the team's new formation left a space in the center where she used to stand. It was August 22, 2018, when 28-year-old Lauren McBride, a seasoned backcountry ranger for Glacier National Park, began what would become her final patrol in the Montana wilderness. Standing 5 feet 6 inches, with an athletic build earned through 6 years of demanding wilderness work, Lauren was known throughout the Park Service for her calm demeanor and unwavering adherence to safety protocols. Her confident and methodical personality had made her popular among both colleagues and park visitors seeking guidance in the backcountry. Lauren's extensive bear safety training and wilderness experience gave her the expertise needed for solo overnight patrols in some of the park's most remote sections. She was conducting a routine inspection of campsites and trail conditions in the park's northwestern section, an area that had recently reported a female grizzly with cubs foraging near popular camping areas. This increased bear activity had prompted enhanced ranger presence in the region. Lauren carried regulation bear spray, a .40 caliber sidearm, and followed all proper food storage protocols to the letter. Her designated camping area was positioned 4.7 miles from the nearest road access, deep in prime grizzly habitat. Following standard procedure, Lauren had radioed her position at 6:30 p.m. as required, with her next mandatory check-in scheduled for 8 a.m. the following morning. Late at night, a female grizzly bear with 2 cubs approached Lauren's campsite, likely investigating residual food odors. Evidence at the site, disturbed bear canisters, torn tent fabric, and claw marks, suggested a defensive encounter had occurred. It appeared that Lauren had tried to defend herself, possibly using bear spray, but the wind likely reduced its effectiveness. The bear inflicted severe injuries, including deep lacerations and broken bones, leaving her body near the tent. The grizzly struck Lauren with her right paw, the 4-inch claws raking across her chest and shoulder, tearing through muscle tissue and breaking her collarbone. Lauren fell backward, striking her head against a rock and suffering a severe concussion that disoriented her as the vicious attack continued. The bear bit down on Lauren's left thigh, her powerful jaws crushing the femur bone and severing the femoral artery. Blood loss was immediate and catastrophic, with Lauren losing approximately 40% of her blood volume within the first 4 minutes. The bear continued the assault for another 90 seconds, inflicting deep lacerations to Lauren's abdomen and puncturing her left lung. Lauren lost consciousness due to hypovolemic shock from massive blood loss, dying approximately 3 minutes later from exsanguination as her life drained away in the remote wilderness she had dedicated her career to protecting. When Lauren failed to make her mandatory 8 a.m. radio check-in, a search team was immediately dispatched to her last known location. Rangers found the attack site at 11:45 a.m., discovering clear evidence of the bear encounter and Lauren's body 15 feet from her tent. The female grizzly and her cubs were tracked and relocated to a remote area of the park rather than destroyed, as wildlife officials determined the attack was purely defensive behavior. Investigation revealed Lauren had followed all proper protocols perfectly, but the bear's protective maternal instincts had overridden the deterrent effects of bear spray. The park updated its policies, requiring mandatory 2-person patrols in areas with recent bear activity reports, preventing future rangers from experiencing what Lauren endured. It was October 3, 2015, in Brooklyn, New York. The narrow alleys of Bushwick were quiet in the early morning. The streets seemed calm, but above them, a single decision set off a chain of moments that neighbors would remember long after the night ended. Victor Ramirez, 29, worked long hours in kitchens across the borough. He washed dishes at a diner in the mornings and took a second shift at a bar in the evenings. His income kept him afloat, but left little margin. Friends described him as confident to the point of carelessness, someone who enjoyed pushing limits. In his free time, he liked demonstrating balance tricks, walking laundry lines behind buildings, or climbing onto roofs where others hesitated to go. The rooftops in his neighborhood offered shortcuts between blocks, and Victor had turned them into his own path home. The buildings were mostly old brick walk-ups, patched with tar and flashing. Lines of cable, pipes, and rusted rails crisscrossed the gaps between structures. They were never meant to bear weight, but Victor saw them as an alternative to staircases and sidewalks. He had shown friends his route before, laughing at the danger. To him, it was routine, but it depended entirely on luck and grip. That night, he finished his second shift just after 2 a.m. and left with a coworker. Instead of following him down the stairs to the street, Victor led him up to the roof access door. The plan was to cross between buildings rather than circle around the block. A tensioned utility line stretched between two rooftops, fixed to rooftop hardware. It sagged slightly from years of tension, narrow and slick from condensation. The coworker, used to Victor's shortcuts, leaned casually against the wall and waited, unaware that the air carried a damp chill that made every surface just a little less forgiving. The first steps went smoothly. He crouched low, arms out, moving slowly along the cable, his shoes pressed into the thin steel which flexed slightly under his weight. At the halfway point, the cable twitched, shifting against its anchors. The motion threw off his rhythm. The coworker later described how Victor froze, then bent his knees deeper to regain stability. For a moment, it looked as if he might recover, but his arms flailed as the cable oscillated. Witnesses on the street below heard a brief yell, followed by the heavy sound of impact. Victor had slipped forward, his body twisting as he lost grip. He struck the pavement of the narrow alley head first, the collision leaving him motionless. Blood pooled beneath his head, where he struck the pavement. The coworker rushed down the stairs screaming for help, but there was little anyone could do. Police and paramedics arrived within minutes, securing the area with tape while neighbors leaned from windows. Victor was pronounced dead at the scene. The fall distance, about 30 feet, had caused massive blunt force trauma. No drugs were found on him, though investigators noted alcohol in his system, consistent with his shift ending at a bar. An autopsy later confirmed his cause of death as a skull fracture with associated brain trauma. In the days following, locals remembered him as daring but reckless. Friends admitted they had seen him take similar shortcuts many times, calling it only a matter of time. Authorities classified the death as an accident, noting that rooftop crossings were not uncommon in the neighborhood, but remained extremely unsafe. Victor Ramirez's case was closed within a week. No further action was taken, but property owners in the area reinforced access doors to discourage similar incidents. It was September 18, 2015, in Jaipur, India. The morning sun was already harsh over the red dirt athletics field, where banners for the intercollegiate meet hung motionless in the still air. Near the edge of the field stood the pole vault pit, an improvised setup that looked out of place amid the running lanes. Ravi Kumar, 20, was a second-year physical education student at a small government sports college. Though known more for sprinting and cricket, he had volunteered to demonstrate pole vaulting after a senior failed to show. He had no formal training in the event, but was determined to prove his versatility to his instructors, who often dismissed him as undisciplined. The college had no sponsor affiliation and limited funding. Its facilities dated back decades, patched together by faculty and students. Ravi's motivation was simple: visibility. He wanted a nod from the visiting coaches that might help him earn a transfer to a better-funded institution in Delhi. Pole vaulting at the college level was rare in Rajasthan due to cost and risk. The setup used that day was rudimentary: a metal box embedded in the ground, 2 upright poles for the crossbar, and a sand pit instead of foam mats for landing. The fiberglass poles were shared equipment, weathered by years of outdoor exposure. The one Ravi selected had visible scuffing near the base and a faint white line in the resin that should have ruled it out for use. The schedule had run late due to an earlier delay, and by the time pole vault began, the temperature had climbed to over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. A visiting coach from another college advised postponing the demonstration because the sandpit's surface had hardened. Ravi shook off the warning, insisting he'd only make one clean jump for the spectators. His teammates looked uneasy as he chalked his hands and tested the pole's flex. The first two warm-up attempts were clumsy. The pole bent too deeply, nearly springing him backward. After the second failure, a staff member noticed the base sleeve beginning to split. Ravi still pressed for one final attempt. He sprinted down the narrow dirt runway, the pole wavering slightly under tension. As he planted the base into the metal box and began to rise, a sharp crack split the air. The fiberglass pole snapped lengthwise under load. Instead of letting go, Ravi's reflexes made him hold on. The upper section whipped upward and then downward in an arc, the splintered end driving into the left side of his chest just below the collarbone. Witnesses saw his body jolt mid-air before he dropped to his knees, both hands clamping instinctively over the wound. The impact caused deep penetration and internal bleeding. The jagged shaft had punctured his lung and major vessels near the heart. Students screamed for help, but most froze at the sight. The event's lone medic ran from the track tent, arriving within seconds. But the bleeding was already profuse. He was placed on a stretcher improvised from a wooden hurdle and carried toward the gate, while another student called the ambulance from a borrowed phone since the medic's radio wasn't working. By the time the vehicle reached him, 11 minutes later, his pulse was gone. The pole fragment was only removed at the hospital during the post-mortem. The athletics meet ended in silence that afternoon. Officials canceled the remaining events and quietly collected the equipment. His name was omitted from the results sheet, recorded instead under technical incident. In the following weeks, the sandpit remained fenced off under the claim of drainage repairs. No public statement was issued by the college, and the damaged pole disappeared from storage. It was September 14th, 2016, when 21-year-old Brooks Coleman's competitive nature would lead him to his death at a Denver construction site. Working as an apprentice electrician, Brooks was known for his fearless attitude and willingness to accept any dare. His construction experience had made him overconfident about workplace hazards, often bending safety rules when supervisors weren't around. That evening, Brooks met up with two co-workers who had been filming dangerous workplace stunts during off hours. Kyle, a 21-year-old laborer's helper with a reputation for pranks, had convinced Brooks to return to their job site after hours. Danny, a 20-year-old apprentice carpenter, reluctantly agreed to film their latest stunt. The high-rise commercial building had reached 12 stories, with upper floors lacking exterior walls and safety barriers. The skeletal steel framework created a deadly maze of open bays, with 8-inch wide I-beams spanning dangerous voids above the concrete foundation far below. Brooks had previously walked along similar beams at ground level, but never at such a lethal height without fall protection. The group had no harnesses, no lifelines, and no safety nets. Variable winds moved through the open structure, carrying debris that could affect the footing. Kyle's plan involved a cruel prank designed to capture Brooks' startled reaction. Brooks had no idea the stunt was a setup and that he was being tricked into walking the beam without knowing a scare was planned. As Brooks would step onto a 10th floor beam, Kyle would sound an air horn from behind to shock him. None considered how a sudden loud noise might affect balance while walking 120 feet above concrete. Workers later said the prank was meant as a startle clip for social media, a trend circulating in construction meme circles at the time. As evening light faded, Brooks climbed to the designated floor and approached the steel beam. He tested his footing carefully, aware that dust could create slippery conditions. The camera was positioned to capture his planned crossing. Brooks mounted the beam and began shifting his weight forward, concentrating on maintaining balance. At that critical moment, Kyle discharged the air horn from directly behind him. The sudden blast caused Brooks to flinch involuntarily, his trailing foot slipping on the dusty surface. His center of mass shifted beyond the beam's edge as he attempted to recover balance. Brooks tried to step wide to regain stability, but the open bay offered no handholds. Gravity took control as he fell through the skeletal framework. During his 120-foot descent, Brooks struck a floor edge and scaffolding equipment, causing severe fractures and massive internal injuries. Each impact altered his trajectory and increased trauma during the fall. The final impact occurred when Brooks struck the concrete foundation slab. The force caused catastrophic head trauma and chest compression injuries. His pulse was absent when his friends reached him. Kyle and Danny frantically called emergency services, but faced delays accessing ground level because site gates were locked. With site gates padlocked for the night, the pair were forced to flag down a passing security patrol to unlock the perimeter, a delay that kept medics from reaching Brooks for nearly 10 minutes. Paramedics initiated resuscitative efforts, but Brooks had sustained injuries incompatible with life. The medical examiner confirmed death resulted from multiple blunt force trauma. The investigation revealed unauthorized site access and the absence of fall protection. The contractor immediately increased perimeter security and implemented zero-tolerance policies regarding pranks around elevated work areas. Kyle faced criminal charges, including trespass and reckless endangerment, for orchestrating the deadly prank. Donnie provided statements to investigators and later participated in safety outreach programs. Brooks' death sparked industry discussions about startle hazards at construction sites, transforming a senseless tragedy into a lesson that would protect future workers from similar fates. It was August 18, 2017, on a winding stretch of provincial ring road in Lombardy, Italy. Cars moved steadily along the otherwise quiet route, unaware that a careless prank, a few reflective cones and a fake hazard sign, had been set up by teenagers hoping to film startled drivers. Marco Rinaldi, 46, had been a professional van driver for over 20 years. He transported perishable goods to the same network of restaurants along the ring road and knew each bend and incline intimately. Married with 2 children, he took pride in his work, rarely speeding and always checking his cargo and vehicle systems before departures. Marco drove a refrigerated van equipped with standard safety features, anti-lock brakes, reinforced cabin, and a dash cam. The cargo area contained temperature-sensitive foods, and sudden braking or swerving risked damaging the load. He had no sponsorship pressures, but there were expectations from clients and a tight schedule. Lateness meant lost contracts or complaints. Despite these pressures, he rarely cut corners, though he sometimes pushed speed limits slightly to stay on time, believing his familiarity with the road compensated for risk. That evening, he was on his routine delivery route, completing the last stops before the weekend. Visibility was limited on the bend where the prank was set up. The teenager's reflective cones caught his headlights at the corner of his vision, and the sudden roadblock prompted him to brake and swerve instinctively. He had no way to know the prank was staged, and no signs warned of the obstruction. In the seconds before the incident, he adjusted the wheel to avoid the cones while maintaining control of the heavy van. The artificial hazard had transformed a familiar, manageable road into an unpredictable trap. Dashcam footage from a pickup ahead captured the first reaction, a sudden stop as the driver saw the cones, tires screeching. Marco swerved to avoid rear-ending the pickup, maneuvering toward the shoulder, but an oncoming lorry emerged from the opposite lane, rounding the bend at speed. The van's evasive motion placed it sideways in the lorry's path. The sequence unfolded in under 5 seconds, each driver reacting to the last, compounding confusion behind them. Witnesses later described the impact. The truck collided with Marco's van on the driver's side, crushing the cabin. Multiple vehicles behind braked and collided in a secondary chain reaction, though none were fatal. Emergency crews arrived quickly after a call from several motorists, using hydraulic cutters to free Marco, but the intrusion into the cabin had caused catastrophic blunt trauma. His body was later examined at the scene, confirming unsurvivable injuries. Investigators reconstructed the scene using dashcam and traffic camera footage combined with witness statements. The teenager's prank was identified as the initial catalyst for the accident. Police noted that the combination of a dimly lit bend and the artificial roadblock created a hazard no skilled driver could fully mitigate. The teenagers faced prosecution for creating a public danger, and local media widely condemned the stunt. Authorities installed additional reflective markers and a speed camera along the bend. He was survived by his wife, Elena, and their 2 children, ages 9 and 12. His funeral was held quietly in his hometown church, attended by relatives, co-workers, and several restaurant owners from his route. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more?